Welcome, everyone, to the Irish Breakdown podcast. Before we begin, if you could please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast wherever you are listening to. We appreciate everybody for hopping in. I am Ryan Roberts, the director of recruiting here at irishbreakdown.com, joined by Mr. Brian Driscoll, the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. If you're confused, it's because I am leading the intro today, which I am excited about because we have been warning you for many weeks now. June is going to get crazy, and it sure did. It start off this past weekend with the Irish invasion, with some campus visits from several talented players, both in the 2023 class, 2024, and even some 2025s. Of course, this is our recruiting hour. Man, Brian, there's a lot to talk about, man. Yeah. I know we want to hit off with some Irish invasion to start. We're going to talk about some offensive line recruiting. We're going to talk about some general stuff we heard over the weekend. A lot of makings, man. I think generally we should start off, though, with the Irish invasion, which happened yesterday. You were able to be in attendance. I know there were players like CJ Carr in attendance, who's a really talented football player. We had the wide receiver that is
Cam Williams.
Kid. Cam Williams was in attendance as well.
Kids.
To Bronte Johnson, excuse me, the in-state that just got an offer.
Bronte, right?
Bronte.
Right? Tay-Tay.
Yeah,
right.
Tay-Tay. That's what threw me off, the Tay-Tay on Twitter. But yes, Bronte Johnson, 4-star, top 50 caliber recruit in the 2024 class. You also had Aeneas Williams, a new spelling of Aeneas Williams, not the Aeneas Williams that I know, but a very talented group, Ryan. I think anybody would be upset if we didn't start off with the quarterback.
Caleb Beasley was there too.
Yeah.
We'll talk about him.
Who may have been the best player on the scene.
Yeah, he had mine.
Yeah.
But you were correct, Ryan. People always want to talk about quarterback first.
Always. So we want to start, of course, with that being Mr. CJ Carr out of the state of Michigan, Saline High School in their 2024, about 6'3", 195 pounds, listed. Really talented player. Listed, yeah. Well, we're going to be generous until we get some official measurements, right? So really talented quarterback in the 2024 class, pretty much consensus top 50 player. I think one has him as a 5-star caliber quarterback. Of course, Lloyd Carr's grandson, which is we want to keep mentioning that, especially if Notre Dame's able to land him down the road. But I hear, Brian, by all indications, he did live up to the billing on Sunday.
He did. Now, keep in mind that the format of the camp was such that he didn't get a ton of work in one-on-ones against the defense. I mean, there was, we were asked a question on the message board. I haven't answered it yet because I've just had a lot of things to do. I haven't got to it yet. But if that person's listening now, is this more kids than have been in the past? I don't know if it was more than we've ever seen, but it was a bigger group than normal. And it was still even not they still had the lineman camp where there's a lot of 23 and especially 24 kids that were at the lineman camp. So there was three huge 6'6", 6'7", 300+ pound kids, even at Irish Invasion, but there was even more kids at the lineman camp. I've heard there was over 100 players at the lineman camp. There had to have been well over 100 kids last night at Irish Invasion, which is for the most part an invite camp. I mean, it's not really, but, they definitely like certain kids to definitely be there. CJ Carr was there. The point I'm saying all that is once they got to one-on-ones, there just weren't a ton of reps for kids to take. But we got a chance to see CJ during individual drills, see him running around. I think that, to me, was my biggest takeaway is he's an even better athlete when you see him moving in drills than he is on film. He's a good athlete on film. We've talked about this, can move the chains and he's a more productive runner now than, for example, Dante Moore is in high school, which, there's stereotypes about both kids, but it's the opposite. They're opposite of what the stereotype is. But, you saw him move around yesterday. this kid's really agile. He looks like a kid. He's a football kid, but he looks like the kind of kid that would be a lacrosse player, right? The build, 6'2.5". He looked like 185 to me, but muscular, lean. He's gonna fill out. He's gonna be 200 plus. He's maybe grow another half inch, but he's just got that really athletic movement, right? The agility, the quickness, some strength to him, and things like that. That's something that stood out first to me because that's not something you can always see on film.
Sure.
And then we saw him throw. I think his arm, the first thing I noticed is from the camp setting compared to where he was in the fall as a maturing kid, probably 16 years old now or getting close to 16 years old. He's kind of hitting that growth spurt. He still looks young. There was a couple 2024 kids. There was a Kobe Howard looks like a senior. I mean, just physically. kind of like Richard Young, just in the face, looks like a college senior. That's Kobe Howard's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about him a little bit later as well. But CJ looks young. I mean, so his body's going to develop. But what I notice is there's already a little bit more jump from the ball coming out of his hand. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks I've seen. What I wrote in the updates on this, the last time I saw a quarterback with his level of accuracy, and what I'm talking true accuracy, meaning ball placement. Can you put the ball high when it needs to be high? Can you put it low and away when it needs to be low and away? Can you back shoulder it when it needs to be back shoulder? Not just hitting guys in stride all the time, but can you really drop it where you need to drop it? And the only kid that I've seen ever be at Irish Invasion that could match or maybe even surpass what CJ did is when JT Daniels was coming out. And as we all know, JT Daniels was, one of the greatest high school quarterbacks we've seen in 20 years. The job he did and modern day and his accuracy and ball placement and just in drills is special. And that's what CJ showed. Now, he doesn't quite have the same arm strength as JT did at the same age. JT was bigger, though.
Yeah.
But noticeable jump, just a few more RPMs, right? Ryan coming out. He still throws with tremendous accuracy. There was a throw he made to Jack Larsen in one-on-ones where they're running corner routes and he just drops it. Just perfect hang time. And what I mean by that is you want to drop it on a dime to a guy, right? Like just really drop it over, but you don't want to float it because that's when the defense can come. His ability to get the ball up with trajectory, but then drop it down with some velocity. So he's not just floating it and aiming it, but he's snapping it off high. It's a release point thing. A lot of kids that don't throw the ball the way he does, they view it as, well, I got to slow my arm speed down. And it's actually sped up a little bit, compact and sped up, but it's more about changing the release point. You need to release it sooner to get that trajectory on it. But if you slow your arm speed down too much, it's going to float. CJ already has that figured out as a rising junior in high school, which I was impressed by. Could throw the out cuts, the hash out cuts effectively with some zip and good ball placement. There was one particular throw. I think he threw it to Cam Williams. There was a comeback route, and the corner had decent coverage on it. But CJ threw it with such timing and the ball placement was such that it was well placed, but it got there with some zip, and the corner, who was in decent position to maybe make a play, just couldn't get to the ball. So Cam Williams is able to catch it. So I was impressed by that. Now, again, we didn't see a lot of competitive reps for him simply because there were so many quarterbacks there. Yes, and there's some good quarterbacks there. So we didn't get to see a ton of that, but just between all the reps that we saw during one-on-ones and routes on air and going through drills, he throws a really pretty ball, real compact release, repeatable release, can throw off platform a little bit. He's not like Dante in that regard. He's a little bit more of a traditional pocket passer, from that standpoint. But that's a part of his game that is evolving. He can do a little bit. But he confirmed to me, Ryan, that he is what you and I thought he was coming in, which is a top 50 recruit with the potential to eventually become a 5-star kid. I don't view him that now, but I also don't view many sophomores as 5 stars.
Right.
You're just not quite there yet. And I don't like lowering the standard of a 5-star simply because you're young. It's like, okay, you either are or you aren't.
Right.
But he's clearly a top 50 recruit. And with still 2 more years of high school left, I'd be surprised if he doesn't eventually become a no-brainer. Sure, yeah, that kid's a 5-star player. But he's got all the makings of it. It's just I need to see some a little bit more physical maturity, just things that are just part of going from 16 to 17 to 18. Right. And that's really what it boils down to. If you go look at pictures of me when I was playing quarterback as a sophomore in high school and then look at me as a senior, I'm just a different kid. 2 inches taller, 15, 20 pounds heavier, and it's just normal maturity. And so CJ will continue to fill out as well, but a very, very impressive performance. And this last thing, Ryan, he carries himself like you'd expect a big-time quarterback to carry himself. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean just like very confident, very communicative, right? Communicates a ton, talks to kids, engaging. He was going up to Caleb Beasley, going up to Cam Williams, going up to Jack Larsen, just talking to other quarterbacks, slapping hands with other quarterbacks, not big time in it, from what I could tell, not big time in other kids like, hey, I'm a 5-star. Who are you talking to me? That kind of thing. It was just talking to everybody, and you look for things like that. Like, okay, is this kid going to walk around like his, like he's, just the man and won't talk to anybody else? He walks like he's the man, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. I want a confident quarterback. I don't want a guy like, oh, I'm just trying to do my best. I want you to think you're the man, and when it's a minute left in the game, you want the ball, right? Meek people don't want the ball with a minute left in the national championship game. But then there's being cocky and confident and being arrogant. I don't want arrogant. And that's what you see from CJ is walking up to people saying, yes, sir, shaking hands with people when people acknowledge him that he doesn't know, smiling and saying, hey, how are you as he walks by, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are traits you see don't often see from a young kid that CJ has. And I think that's partly where his pedigree comes into play because he's been around this his whole life, with who his grandfather is. So I was impressed by him. Like he solidified no-brainer top 50 caliber player. He's going to be one of the 2 or 3. There's only one quarterback in the class that I would say for sure right now I have graded higher than him, and that's the Raiola kid going to Ohio State. That's it. Sure. He's in that conversation with with Jaden Davis and with all those other quarterbacks in the class, and it's a good class. I don't know if it's as top heavy, like if it's as 5-star heavy as this 23 class, but it's really good and really deep. And right now, the only quarterback I've seen that I have a higher grade on than CJ Carr is Raiola, who's going to Ohio State. So that's a good sign for Notre Dame because as we get into the recruiting part, Ryan, that Notre Dame's in a really good position with CJ Carr.
Yeah, no, they are. And I would just like people to kind of be aware of that for a second because we get asked this all the time, Brian, is like, how serious of a contender could they be for a CJ Carr? Right. Because he's Lloyd Carr's grandson and he lives in the state of Michigan. I'm just here to say, I'm not going to spoil too much. They're a player. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. I'll say it. I'll say it. Right. I respect the fact that you're like, okay, I don't know if he's going to want me to say this or not. Well, I'm going to make the executive decision to say it. There's leader and a clear leader for CJ Carr right now. And this is one of the advantages to making Dante Moore your only guy in 23. The decision to make Dante the only player in 23, and trust me, the first question I get asked is, does Notre Dame making a push for CJ Carr indicate that they're less confident in Dante Moore? No. No. They are still feeling the same way they feel about Dante Moore. They're still pushing for Dante Moore. This is a byproduct of, one, you keep recruiting good players, just like if CJ Carr committed tomorrow, he's not going to. I'm not saying he is. I'm just making an example. They're still going to recruit Bryce J. Underwood and other top 25 guys that are elite. That's what you do when you're an elite program. You're not always going to land a 5-star quarterback every year because that's just some kids are like, okay, I don't mind competition, but come on. Like, that's absurd. But the point is that they're going after CJ Carr just like they're not going to not recruit top running backs because they have Jaden Lamar. Just like they're not going to not recruit top defensive linemen just because they have Keon Keeley and Boubacar Traore and Brendan Vernon and Devin Houston. And same thing, they're going to continue to recruit elite linebackers in 24, just even though they have Drake Bowen, right? You know what I mean? That's what great programs do. What I will say is this is a byproduct of the decision that was made a couple months ago to say there's only one quarterback we want in 23. There's only one quarterback that we view as a program changer that we want, and it's Dante Moore. Once Notre Dame went down that aisle, it then allowed Tommy Rees to focus his attention on the 2024 class. And this is a byproduct of that. So he's been able to do looking at Jaden Davis, looking at Adrian Posse, looking at, all those other kind of things and being able to look at it. And I don't know, Spanky brought this up. Thank you for the super chat, Spanky. Hasn't CJ Carr said he won't go where Dante goes? I have never heard CJ Carr say that. He has never hinted that. And if that were true, Notre Dame wouldn't have recruited him. Right. And so I don't know where that came from. I don't know if that was one of those knuckleheads that covers Michigan that, likes to put out all types of false things. I don't know where it came from, but he has never hinted that to us. And Ryan's talked to him multiple times, correct? And I believe Sean has talked to him. No one from the other side of that recruitment has ever mentioned that to us. We have never heard that before other than on message boards. That's it. So I don't believe that to be true, in my opinion. There's never been anything to that in our view. But that decision to focus on Dante has helped them because they looked at Jaden Davis, who they like. They looked at Adrian Posse, other than Raiola, I don't know if there's another quarterback just from a pure arm strength standpoint that has a stronger arm that I've seen. It's a really good 2024 class. Yeah, but they've identified CJ Carr as that guy. So because they went in all on Dante and they're not like, well, we got to spend our time on the spring getting out, seeing other 2023 quarterbacks. They did what we said they should do, which is put all their eggs in the Dante Moore basket. We'll find out if that works out or not. But I'm not going to criticize for doing what we said they should do. But what that has done is that it has allowed them to then focus on, okay, now CJ's the next guy. It's not instead of, it's the next guy. And that's what great programs do. And let's be honest about something else. You do not want a quarterback that's afraid of going somewhere because there's another highly ranked kid there. You go and beat him out. And if you look at the schools that CJ Carr has looked at, Ohio State, Michigan, they're going to sign a big-time quarterback in the year before him or soon after, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's not going to go to Michigan and because what? He's afraid they may sign Bryce J. Underwood the next year. And somebody said this, like, do you think Dante Moore would be afraid of if Notre Dame got CJ Moore? Because it's the other question, Ryan. If Notre Dame gets CJ Carr, is that going to hurt them with Dante Moore? Dante Moore's looking at Notre Dame, who has Tyler Buckner, who's going to be there for multiple years. He's looking at Texas A&M, who just signed Connor Wigman, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the 2022 class, 5-star kid, elite quarterback. He's looking at Miami, who signed Jake Garcia in the 21 class, top 50 quarterback. He redshirted, right? And so I'm trying to think, LSU, he's looking at LSU, who just signed a 5-star quarterback in Walker Howard in the class right in front of him. If he was going to shy away from competition, Oregon signed the Thompson kid in the 21 class who redshirted last year. So there's going to be only a year of separation eligibility there. If Dante Moore was worried about competition, he's going to look ahead, not behind.
Right.
And so the fact that he's looking at the schools he's looking at tells me Dante's not worried about what else you got on the depth chart. He's going to go and compete. He wants to go somewhere to compete wherever it goes from. Wherever he goes to, excuse me. And so I don't think that's going to be an issue. And so I just want to kind of dispel those things, kind of before we get to, because those are the questions we always get asked, right, Ryan, on the message board. Every time we mention CJ Carr, Dante Moore, they kind of go hand in hand. And, I don't think either's going to have a huge impact on either's recruitment, in my opinion. If they, let's just say again, hypothetically, CJ Carr committed tomorrow, if Dante Moore goes somewhere else, which we still think we still feel good about Notre Dame, it's not going to be because he was afraid of competing against CJ Carr.
Agree. Yeah.
So
no, it's a great point. I would say this again. Every time that I've talked to CJ, he speaks very highly of Notre Dame. We know that there's a huge connection there. We also know, and we didn't talk about this, Tommy Rees loves CJ Carr. Like, that is his guy in the 2023 cycle, right? So just keep an open mind. I'm just telling you right now, just because he's Lloyd Carr's grandson and he has the Michigan ties, it's a possibility there, right? So let's move on, Brian. I think we would need to talk about some of these skill position players that guys like CJ and the other quarterbacks on campus were able to throw to. A player that we have known about, he visited in the past already, is
twice, right?
What's that? Aeneas Williams?
Oh, no, sorry. I thought you were going to talk about Cam Williams.
Oh, you're going to the Cam?
Sorry.
No, I was going to give the running backs.
Yeah.
The running backs a little bit of love here because Aeneas Williams, who played for the Rams and the Cardinals, was one of my favorite players growing up. He spells it a little differently, this Aeneas Williams, but out of the state of Missouri, a 5'11", 200-pound running back who, if you turn on, I was just writing him up a little bit, Brian. He had almost 2,800 all-purpose yards last year, 47 touchdowns, and another 73 tackles and 3 interceptions on defense. Like, a very ridiculous stat line for Aeneas Williams. Obviously, he plays at a smaller school, so I would assume that Notre Dame wanted to see him in person to kind of size him up, make sure that he kind of checks those boxes. If you watch his film, the kid is, as a runner, they put him in the slot and they ask him to run vertical routes. Like, he's not just like a check down dude. He's not running angle routes. This kid is running a legit route tree as a slot receiver as well. A little harder sometimes in these types of settings to get a real feel for running back at points, right? But for the most part, it sounds like he looked as advertised as an athlete yesterday. The
thing Notre Dame wanted to see, I would imagine, is with a kid like that who's got great film, is, okay, let me see if he's as big as he says he is. Because when you play against bad comp, usually those guys are smaller. It's harder. Like, if you look like you have the size to play and you're playing in Dallas or LA or Miami or, those type, the size checks, right? Like, if you can physically play there, it's a little different when you're playing in Hannibal, Missouri, where you're like, I don't know what the standard to gauge it against is, right? So I think seeing him check out and Ryan, I wrote this last night. You and I have a similar thought process on comps. I hate lazy comps. I hate comps that you have to compare someone just to a person that they went to school, they're going to the same school, or you're the school you cover, or because they're the same race or the same. Like, it's about finding something for style of play and body type. But I mean, I'm sitting there, I'm like, please don't pick Kyron Williams. Like, dude, Brian, just think of somebody. And I couldn't because, and here's what I mean, like, not only just the last name, they're both from Missouri, but same, like, very similar height. I think Aeneas is a little taller. Very similar body types, really that well-built lower body. That's something I think Notre Dame wanted to see. And I'm just going off common sense of what you want to see is you want to see a running back that's got something to his lower body, right? Really athletic, cut up upper body kid, but still room to add more weight to it. He's listed at 5'10", 195. I don't know about the 5'10" part. He was close. The 195 part I buy. Like, after seeing him yesterday, I buy that. Which means he's already as big as Kyron. I mean, he looked as big as Kyron Williams body-wise now, like what Kyron is now. And I think he's at least an inch taller than what Kyron is. So the body checked out, right? So then it's like, okay, let me see the feet move. Like, I don't care about what a running back at camp. It's not about can he play running back. I want to see how he moves. And so, watching Coach, that was the cool thing for me. I had to kind of stop watching Coach McCullough so I could actually watch the kids that were there because, it's my first chance seeing Jared Parker coaching in action. First chance to see Coach Sucky and Coach McCullough and those guys coaching. Coach Washington. That was pretty cool. So I finally focused on Aeneas and, really smooth feet, really easy movement, Ryan. Like, it's just not – and what I mean is, like, there's just not a lot of effort and strain to movements. He's able to plant quickly and get out. He's able to – spin and then plant his feet and then go, right? That's the balance part. Like, a lot of guys can spin, but if you don't have agility and balance, you're not going to land and go. There's going to be a gather period. And that's when we talk about what does it mean when you talk about running backs balanced. When he gets hit in the leg and he gets knocked off course, does he quickly get his feet back on the ground and go, or does he kind of got to balance himself, right, and then go? Guys with great balance hit that ground and they're right back to it, right? And we kind of saw those things from Aeneas yesterday. Really nice feet. And here's the other thing I liked. This may not seem like a big deal to some people, but as a coach, it is. He was the first kid in line at every single drill they went through. And Coach McCullough would instruct him, and it was quick instruction. I mean, he talks fast. And he was not dumbing it down for rising juniors in high school. He was, and I got to think that was on purpose. It was, let me see how quickly you can absorb knowledge and then go do it. And every time Aeneas was bam, 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 doing exactly how he wanted to do it. And that stood out to me as well. So that tells me he's a kid that takes coaching. He takes instruction. He's a smart kid. He can see something and quickly apply it. That's what you want. Because that's the kind of kid you're sitting there at halftime of a game and you got to change up your aiming points. You got to change up your blocking scheme. Or you got to change up at a route that you think could work. But you've got a kid at running back or receiver quarterback that you need 3 days of practice before he figures it out. You can't make those adjustments. This is something a lot of people don't think about when you think about halftime adjustments or in-game adjustments. It's also about how quickly can kids absorb what you're doing and go do it, or do you need to rep it 20 times? Well, what I saw from Aeneas yesterday is Dylan McCullough could show it to him one time in slow motion, and Aeneas would immediately do it exactly how the coach wanted it done. That's a great sign. That's a great sign. And it just continues what you and I know to be true, Ryan, which is the 2024 running back board is impressive because, like you said, this is his second trip on campus. He was also on campus in April for an unofficial visit. So this is the second time he's made a trip from campus, and it's just more of a concerted effort on the article that IB had a while ago about Missouri is becoming a more and more and more important state to Notre Dame, and Aeneas Williams is just another example of that.
Well, I mean, 2024 could be huge for Notre Dame potentially. If you're talking about Aeneas Williams, you're talking about Ryan Wingo at wide receiver. You talked about Jeremiah McClellan, who is the teammate of Jeremiah Love, who's a 2023 running back on the board for Notre Dame.
Jay-Sean Ross, who's my new player crush in that class. We were asked that question on the Mailbag Friday. I guess you guys were asked on Thursday, Ryan, about, well, they said, who's my 24 guy? And I was like, probably Jay-Sean Ross is my new player crush. Like, man, I just love that kid, So Missouri kid, Kansas City kid.
Yep.
So, yeah, sorry.
You love the 6'4", 220-pound Vipers that can also play wide receiver.
I mean, what a nut job I am.
I respect it, man. I respect it. I love athletes. So there we
Let's
are.
be real. If Keon Keeley wanted to be a high school wide receiver, you know he would be.
Oh, for sure.
I
Tight end, at
mean,
least.
just
Yeah,
throw him fades. I mean, who's
exactly.
going to
Yeah.
cover him? You know what I
No,
mean?
you're not wrong.
But
You are
that's Jay
not wrong
Sean.
about
Love
that.
that
Yeah.
kid.
No, you are not wrong at all. So I was happy to see that Aeneas had a nice day overall. Did they let him run any routes, Brian? Would they put him in the slot or anything, or was he just
They
running
did.
running
I
back
didn't see
drills?
those.
Okay,
That
gotcha.
was I was somewhere else when I looked over and saw them doing that stuff. I didn't get a
Gotcha.
chance to see him doing that. I only saw him kind of going through the drills and all the running back specific stuff.
Understood.
So, because I got to decide, okay, what matters more for me? I know he can catch the ball. I've seen it on film, right? Like,
Right.
to me, I want to see the body and I want to see the feet and I want to see the balance and those type of things. Does that check out? And then, I want to see other kids. I want to see how other kids catch the ball clean or not. There's other positions that are more important. Now, he's not like Kyron in that regard. Like, if you watch his film, he runs routes out of the backfield. Like, there's a seam route on his film where he just outruns the defense and they drop it over the top. Shows he can track the deep ball well. He's not like Kyron in that he's going to go out and be like an immediate, like, I remember their freshman year, Kyron Williams is like screwing Kyle Hamilton into the ground on a corner route, right? Like, there's no other running backs that were doing that to him. He's not quite there, but he's got legit potential as a guy that can not only catch the ball in the backfield, but from film, but a kid that can play in the slot, like we talk about with Jabron Payne and guys like that. I do think he brings that to the table, but that's more my opinion of watching him on film than because, like, to me, you tracking a ball is one of those things that I don't need to know the competition you're playing against and know if you can track the deep ball or not. You can either track it or you can't. You know what I mean? Just the nature of looking up for the ball. You're not seeing anything else. It's the other things that maybe are a little bit more challenging relative to seeing what you're seeing on film. But if a kid can catch, he can catch, right? If a kid can put his foot in the ground and run a corner route, he can put his foot in the ground and run a corner route,
Yep.
And those things I saw on film, so that's why I wasn't as concerned about seeing that yesterday.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
that's my stance.
I actually do like the Kyron Williams comp because I feel like that's what everyone's kind of thrown on Jaden Lamar. But I think that this kid, Aeneas Williams, reminds me a lot more of Kyron Williams just from a physical perspective and just a play style perspective, right? Like, I think there's a more apt comparison in there. So, Brian, one guy that we almost jumped to, but I wanted to give the running back a little bit of love was Cam Williams, another talented wide receiver who's been on campus multiple times in the past. We had a couple of talented receivers, obviously, that were at the event, including Jack Larsen at tight end, who I know we want to talk about a little bit as well. But let's start with Cam Williams. I know he's got some length to him. He's right around 6'1", 180 pounds or so. Really smooth type of athlete. What did you see from Cam yesterday?
Well, one, he looked bigger than 180 pounds. He looked 6'1.5", right? At least 6'1.5". He was a lot fuller than I thought he was going to be, and I mean that in a good way. Like, he was cut. He had a really athletic body. He wasn't like narrow shouldered. Like, Bronte Johnson's tall and thin, right? Like, he's gonna have to fill out and all that. But when you look at Cam Williams, like, he looks like an older player. Just physically looks like an older player. So that was the first thing that stood out. And again, that's always the first thing you want to look at a camp. Is, okay, well, how does this kid look? Does he have broad shoulders? Is he narrow? Can he fill out his frame and those type of things? And then after that, it was just he ran a 4.47, and you could just see it when he ran the 40. I didn't know what the time was initially. I'd heard one of the Notre Dame coaches went up to him afterwards and had not Notre Dame coaches. There was somebody that was at the camp that went up to him afterwards and said, 4.47. Like, wow. He's like, yeah, I was hoping to get under a 4.5, but so I mean, that's where I heard the 4.47. But you could see, because they do testing with these kids, right? They do 40 times and agilities and all that kind of stuff. And they had all of the kids run. But when Cam ran, you could kind of see them all. You could see a buzz. And Ryan, you've been doing this in the scouting world. I mean, when somebody ran a time that people are impressed by, because there's two reactions. One is everybody looks around to confirm, like, oh, and then there's the oh crap, he ran a 4.7, that you just kind of like, you kind of look down at first and you're like, and then you're like, oh,
mouth gets open a little bit.
Yeah, you have like, ooh, you can see when someone ran a bad time, but when they start quickly turning around, like showing each other the watch and stuff like that, like, you let the dude ran some stuff. And 4.47 for a kid with his size and frame as a sophomore is a good time. And so the reason they're looking around is they're all comparing, right? Like, one guy may have had a 4.47. The reason you have like 3-4 people timing at a time is sometimes you get a fast start or a late start or a too fast of a finish or a late finish, which is going to make a kid look slower or faster. Well, the reason you have multiple people timing is you kind of look, hey, I had a 4.47. The other guy's like, I got a 4.61. Like, okay, did you have a clean, because you kind of know, Ryan, when you've done this for a long time, you kind of know, like, I got a late start on that one, or I jumped the gun on that. You kind of feel it. So that's why you compare. And then if there's 3 people doing it and one person's the outlier, the outlier didn't get it right. And that's why you have multiple people. So that's why they're all buzzing, like looking around, and everybody had a very similar time. And so I think that was a big thing for me, is because he looks like he has speed on film. But again, it's okay. Is it the competition? But he went out there and he would just run by people and go routes. That's the thing you want to see. It was a decent group of DBs yesterday, but he was running by guys, getting steps, catching the ball down the field. He's a really clean route runner, very efficient route runner. I don't know who coaches him, but he's been well coached. For a sophomore, he knows how to play football. Had a really nice post route. As a college receiver, I would have coached him up a couple things. But for a sophomore, rising junior, stemmed the guy out, stuck him, beat him to the top, created separation, and just once he got a step on the kid had no chance. And he made a great play on it, and just really, and he catches the ball clean, Ryan. He attacks the ball even when it's in his body. He still gets it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes the ball's right here. You can't go like this when the ball's coming at your chest.
Sure.
But he'll still kind of,
natural
get
plucker.
It. Yeah.
Natural plucker.
Doesn't just let the ball come into his chest. Because if the ball hits my hands here, unless you get your hands on my hands, I'm still catching it. If the ball gets into your body and you hit me from behind, the ball's popping out. It's just physics. And so, showed me confidence, good body control on some back shoulder stuff. Just, is he a dynamic, oh my gosh, that's the next Will Fuller guy? No. But other than that, I loved everything I saw about him. Hands, speed, foot quickness, loose hips, good body control. And he doesn't, when the ball's deep, he doesn't run with his hands extended, which I hate.
Late hands, man.
He's just
late hands,
right? That's a sign of a confident kid and a kid that's been coached up well. So I loved everything I saw from Cam yesterday. He's ranked in the 150 range. That's the floor for me. That ranking is the floor for me. I think he looked like a top 100 caliber kid to me yesterday. No question about it.
Yeah, I think from a style perspective, I would say he's a little comparable to a Lorenzo Styles, right? He's got kind of that long, lean frame, but he's really explosive and he's got that quickness to him. I think that's kind of he could be for me, Cam Williams, I think could be a 3-level separator, right? He's mentioned the speed. I think he's got the flexibility to run some routes. So very impressive day from Cam Williams. Want to send a shout out to Kate Grant for the super chat there. Kate Grant, we appreciate you as always being in the chats, being on the message board, on Twitter. You are everywhere, my friend. So we thank you so much.
The other thing on that, Ryan, too, is the comparison with Lorenzo. Lorenzo, part of what makes Lorenzo good is he's a smart football player, too. He's not just an athletic kid. He's he's got a football IQ. And Cam shows some of that on film, but you really kind of got a feel for that yesterday with just, you could see him whenever Coach Stuckey was talking, you could just see Cam just like razor focus on what he was saying. And you could just see he likes to be coached. He likes to, and he was a really mild kid too. He wasn't out there getting in people's face. He just has a quiet confidence to him. I hate to do this to you, man, but sorry, it's got to be done, and then, what's that lyric from the Jay-Z, right? I hate to do it to you as hate to you have it done, or I forget what the lyric is, but that's kind of how Cam carried himself, which I liked as well. I don't mind a flamboyant receiver, but I also like those quiet assassins, the Jerry Rices and the Isaac Bruces and guys like that. I'm a big fan of that. So that's how Cam showed to me today. So I wanted to compare that part too.
Yeah, kind of lulls you to sleep a little bit, right? You don't really expect it, and then it's just oh, that's 4.47 running past me. That's different, right? So yeah, Cam Williams is a guy that we have been high on for a little bit here, and it's always nice to verify those things in person. Another thing that you were able to verify, I know we talked yesterday. Actually, you want to hit this question first?
Yeah, before we move on, just real quick,
Yeah, so Brandon asks, who do you like more, Cam Williams or Caleb Brown? Brian, any initial thoughts on that?
And then he followed up with how do they compare? They're different players. I can't – they're different players. Cam is more of a natural receiver. He's if I'm looking for an outside guy, Cam Williams is the guy that I would prefer because he's taller and he's got that ability. If I'm looking for a slot to X, then it's Caleb Brown, because Caleb is a dynamic after the catch guy. You get him a jet, you get him a reverse, you throw him a slant, you throw him a cross, work the seams. I mean, almost like a borderline running back type of guy. That's Caleb Brown. Outstanding player. I had him as a top 50 recruit last year. So in that role, I like Caleb. And this is part of what liking a guy more or worse is. Well, it depends on what role you're asking for. If you're asking me, I need a W, would you take Caleb Brown or Cam Williams? I'm taking Cam Williams, right? Because he's better in that role. If you're asking me, hey, I need a Z, who would you like better? I'm definitely taking Caleb Brown because he fits that role better. So Caleb is the more explosive athlete. Cam's the more natural receiver, right? If that makes sense. So that's how I would compare them. It's a great question. Great question, Brandon. But that's how I would kind of compare those two guys.
Yeah, and Cam's unique, sort of again like Lorenzo Styles. Like ideally, you want to put him to the field, but like he could be a different type of in the boundary type of receiver at times too, right? Because he has that separation ability.
Right.
Really,
and he's going to get
Brandon.
bigger. He's going to be six. He's already 6'1.5", 6'2" already.
Yep.
He's going to be 195, 200 pounds early in his career. So to your point, I mean, he's got some of that, much like the comp you made with Lorenzo. He's got even more. I think he looks bigger to me now than Lorenzo does right now. Right. Yeah. And so another guy that I saw yesterday filled out, speaking of, by the way, I didn't recognize him at first because he dyed his hair, but Braden Lenzy has, like, I finally got a chance to see what you saw in the spring. Yeah. He's a different dude. Like physically, he's a different guy. He's
been in the weight room a little bit.
I didn't recognize him because of the dyed hair. Right? Like normally a guy dyes his hair, you can still see the body type, but nope. Because it's been 2 years since I've seen Braden in person. And so getting to see him yesterday, I was like, okay, Braden has, now I see what Ryan and Vince and Sean were talking about this spring when they're like, Braden Lenzy looks like a different dude. I saw it yesterday. He's filled out.
Somehow he's filled out and gotten more flexible as well, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think he's finally built up his lower body. I think for a long time, Braden was a track athlete playing football from the standpoint of how he prepared. And it's just a different physical preparation. For track, I got to build you up to go run one race, twice in a day, maybe 3 times, depending on what tournament you're at, sometimes once. It's a different type of preparation. It's a different type of stretch. It's a different type of everything. Now Braden's a football player. And he's always been a football player, but like what I mean is like his body is now built more like a football player. So I think, again, track is, I don't need to be flexible in track as much, right? Like, I mean, you need to have looseness. You can't be tight, but like, you don't have to change direction to sprint. Just got to be able to go that way real fast. And I think Braden Lenzy now looks like a guy that understands that. Not understands, but his body's gotten to the point. He's also past 2 straight years worth of injuries. He was healthy last year. So he's finally able to go through an offseason healthy and not have to rehab and all that other kind of stuff. So yeah, no doubt. Somebody said his best year was his freshman year. I think you're referring to his sophomore year. It was actually the year that he broke out. He didn't play much as a freshman in 2018.
Yeah, but to Will's point that he put out in the chat, Will, I'm scared of it too, man. I'm hoping Braden doesn't let me down because I have big expectations for Braden Lenzy heading into 2021. I think 2022, excuse me.
All I'm going to say is I have talked to several people, and the thing that I constantly hear about Braden, and we'll get back to the other stuff here after this, everybody sees something different from a mentality standpoint. This is the first time that people have really come out and just been like, this dude is hungry. Like, he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder that's healthy, right? I think there's an unhealthy chip on you can have an unhealthy chip on your shoulder. And at times I think Braden had that. And it was more of a, why are you coming at me kind of thing. Now it's like, okay, I got you. Okay. Doubt me. Go for it. Because I'm going to show you. And it's more of coming from a positive energy standpoint as opposed to a negative energy standpoint. And I think that's really good for the kid. And I think he's poised to have a big year. Again, got to stay healthy, but I'm really excited to see what Braden can do this year. I really am.
Oh, absolutely. And I know we were talking again about The great thing about these events is for players that have been offered already or have not been offered already, it's a good barometer to kind of see physically how the improvements that they've been making this offseason. I know one guy, Brian, we weren't necessarily worried about it, but anytime you're a 6'3", 225-pound tight end, speaking about Jack Larsen, who seems to be right near the top of the tight end board for 2024 from Notre Dame, you're going to worry for a second and say, is he legitimately 6'3"? Does he have a body that can gain another 20 pounds? So it could be 240, 245, somewhere in that ballpark. We were on the phone last night and you said, yes, he does look like he has the height factor and he is a bigger kid than maybe some anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, he ran by me and walked by me a couple times. I'm 6 foot, and I mean, he was, how to say, definitely taller than I was, and by at least a couple inches. I mean, he was definitely taller than I was. I mean, he had some size to him. I would say when he was standing next to Jared Parker, the position coach, who's a taller guy, played wide receiver at Kentucky, he was definitely taller than he was. And he was at least an inch to an inch and a half taller than Marcus Freeman when he stood next to him. And that's the best way to gauge is, in Marcus Freeman 6'1.5". So the 6'3" looked legit to me. And he looked thicker than the 215-ish, that he showed. And he's got a nice frame. He's going to be, he looks a lot like Kane Barong did coming out of high school, and maybe even just a touch thicker lower body. I saw Kane Barong yesterday, by the way, too. He looked great. He looks healthy and really filled out the upper body. He looks really good. Saw Gabriel Rubio yesterday. He is put together really well. Like he looks
he's a massive kid, Gabriel Rubio. He's a big boy.
And he's never not smiling. I love that kid. Sorry, I forget the football player part. He's just a great kid. But he's got some of that to him, right? Like he's not like a skinny receiver. He is a smaller tight end. He is a 6'3", 225, 230. He's going to be 240 plus at 6'3". And again, that's assuming over the next 2 years he doesn't grow at all. You're right. I mean, just assuming he caps out at his height now, his height's not an issue. And he's got some length too. That's the other thing, Ryan, too, that I wanted to see up close. He's got some length to him. He's not like super, super long, but he's got some length. He doesn't have like little, like small arms, short arms. I thought that was good too. So when somebody asks, is 6'3" sufficient enough for a tight end? Yeah, it's going to be about the role they're going to use him in, though, right? Like he's part of a tight end room. Number one is I think that too much is made of. There's too many people in the recruiting world that are still thinking that this is like 1985, where tight ends got to be like 6'5", 6'6", 250 pounds. There's a role for guys like him. There's a role for, the Eric Ebrons and who's the kid that came out of Ole Miss a couple years ago? Evan Ingram, right? Yep. There's a role for guys like that in college, especially. And in a 12 personnel offense, it's a lot. I mean, put it like this. He's as big now as Tommy Tremble was coming out of high school. Right. All right. I mean, there you go. And I don't think height was ever Tommy Tremble's problem. He was, a third-round NFL draft pick?
Yep.
Right? Now, he's not the explosive vertical athlete that Tommy was, but he's a little bit more of a natural football player right now than Tommy was at the same age. So I don't think size is the problem. Size is only a problem for the role you ask him to play. If you're going to ask Jack Larsen to be a carbon copy of Cole Kmet or Michael Mayer, no, he doesn't fit that role. But you're not going to be dumb enough, I don't think, to recruit him to play that role. You're going to recruit him to play a complementary role, or when he is, because think about how many times Michael Mayer was detached last year. It was a lot. That's the role that Jack Larsen will thrive at. What you're just not going to do as of right now is attach him and say, go power block a 9 technique all the time. I think he'll get there. And that's actually an area where being 6'3" could help him because he's going to be able to play with better pad level in the run game. It's just about developing the strength and the technique and those things. I'm not worried about it. I think he can do everything you're going to ask him to do, but being 6'3" is going to also give you some options to where, you can put him in more of a fullback role. It's hard to get a 6'5", 6'6" guy to run through on an ISO and get low enough to get underneath the pads of a 6'2" linebacker. Right. That's hard to do, right? With Tom, that's what made Tommy Tremble so great at that. He could just kick out a 9 technique, and he was always going to be the low man because he was only 6'3", 6'3.5", right? And so he could wrap around on a pole, get up in there, and get up under the pads of a Mike linebacker because they were the same height or similar height. Jackson will be able to do that. It's harder for Michael Mayer to do that. You've got to use him in more traditional blocking roles as a tight end, where with Kevin Bauman, with Kane Barong, with Jack Larsen, if Notre Dame were to get him, you have that not number two, but that more of that H-back type of role that you can use for your tight end.
Sure.
And so it would just be about how you use him and for how they would use him. And they have shown that they can use tight ends in that role. He fits it just fine. And there's, and that's why they've seemed to kind of zeroed in on him as one of the 2 or 3 guys that they really like and really want at tight end in this class. And, you saw him and CJ Carr were basically attached to the hip yesterday during the event.
Yeah. I remember when they originally offered him, Nick Muse, who is now a NFL player, was drafted out of the University of South Carolina. He texted me and said, "Oh, that's a dude if Notre Dame can land Jack Larsen." So very interesting player. Now, I would just like to say on the size component to it, like you said, there's a role variation, obviously dependent upon size a little bit. The only thing I will add to that is if you are slightly undersized, you need to overcompensate in some other area. And Jack Larsen is a good athlete. So that kind of overcompensates for a lack of height.
And that's what I saw yesterday too. Yeah.
Exactly.
He comes off the line quickly, gets a really nice burst, gets in and out. There was a couple times he was running routes. You could tell he hadn't run a ton, and I didn't necessarily see on film, and he'd just get a little choppy, but it was more of a technique thing. But when he was running a route he was confident in, he can get in and out of that sucker quickly. Right.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. That's the other thing he showed yesterday. Really nice hands, really clean hands, really confident hands. And that's always important. Like Bronte Johnson, for example, he's got the size, the length, the speed, the catch radius, all the things you want in a receiver. He just doesn't catch the ball great.
Yes.
Which is, I think, partly why Notre Dame's looking at him as a DB, because that's where he worked out yesterday. And so, that's kind of where I see that one, right? I think that he fits that. And if you look at some of the tight ends, I mean, he's not the only guy like that they're recruiting. Like if you look at the 2024 tight end board, the exception of Jonathan Eccles and the Brady Prieskorn kid, most of the tight ends they're recruiting are in that 6'3", 6'4" range. And I think part of that is because if you look at the last 2 classes, there's Holden Stace, who's 6'4", but then the next 2 are Eli Raridan, 6'6", traditionalist tight end, and you just signed Cooper Flanagan. So it's not about finding necessarily, per se the best tight end, but the combination of the guy that you think is the best, while that also has to fit the role you're looking for and to build your roster up correctly. And I think that can be like the tiebreaker. Like, hey, we love these 3 kids, but this kid fits a role maybe we're a little bit, maybe more of a need for. And to me, that's kind of where I see this. Where like, Brandon asked about, how I feel about, based off film, who do I like more, Jack Larsen or Brady Prieskorn. And to me, like, they're a little different players, like I love Brady's film, but he's more of a big vertical, Eli Raridan, guy. Michael Mayer. He's that Cooper Flanagan type of player. To me, I think Jack's a different kind of player, to the point where I'd say I like them both a lot. I think Jack is the better athlete. Brady's bigger and stronger, and he can run vertically pretty well, but he's not the sudden, work right. He's a bit more traditional in that standpoint. Great ball skills. And, like I said, the tight was this you and I talking about this last night? So far, from what I can tell, the 2024 tight end class is absolutely loaded. The fact that Luca kid's not going to get an offer from Notre Dame, and the fact that Christian Betancourt hasn't got an offer yet from Notre Dame, maybe he does, says a lot about how loaded this tight end class is. Yeah. I mean, so far I've seen it. I mean, you've got, and just the guys that they've offered so far. I mean, Martavius Collins is really good. Jonathan Eccles is really good. Landon Thomas is really good.
A dude.
Brady is really good. Jack Larsen is really good. There's not a wrong answer in which tight end do you like most of that. It's like, who do you want at tight end from that group? You don't care, right? Like, then it becomes, okay, well, what's your need? So the need for me is give me one of Landon, Jack, or Martavius Collins is more of filling the need.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I look at it. So
Agreed.
they're, as far as my favorite guy, I think probably Landon Thomas would be the best that I've seen so far.
Yeah.
Martavius Collins is a pretty good player too. Jack Larsen's a really good football player. I'd say probably Landon Thomas and then Jack's in that conversation for who would grade out highest the next. But again, that's not necessarily how you do it when you're recruiting. It's more about, okay, I got 4 dudes. Let me take the first one that wants to come, because there's not really a pecking order. If one guy is significantly better than the others, then you may have a pecking order.
Yeah.
But at a position like this, you take that one, and then if you love the class enough, you just keep recruiting the others.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that's what I would just, if you're able to land Jack Larsen, and like to the point I was making earlier, Ryan, is him and CJ Carr were like attached at the hip.
Mhm.
And Notre Dame loves him. I mean, he put a photo out on Instagram where he's at the beach rocking Notre Dame gear. You know what I mean? Like, okay, they got a good shot there. So, you know, if they want him and they push for him, I think they'll have a great shot to get him. But just because you get him doesn't mean that you've got to stop recruiting the other guys.
Exactly.
Right? If Landon Thomas wants to keep talking to you, you take him, because you can play in both. That's the thing about Notre Dame's offense, is you can play in both. You can play both of them and Cooper Flanagan together at some point in time. That's the nature of Notre Dame's offense. So you just look at it differently than maybe a lot of other schools. Georgia and Notre Dame, I think, can look at tight ends different, building a tight end depth chart differently than a lot of other schools, just because of how they run their offense.
No, it's a great point. I mean, like you said, the fact that Luca Puccinelli, who's a really talented tight end in his own right, it doesn't even have an offer right now.
Christian Betancourt can play.
Yes, he can.
I mean, he looked good yesterday at Irish Invasion. He can play. It's just there's just a little different. There's just a little bit different level with Jack and some of those other guys, in my opinion.
Now, like you said, Martavius Collins, Jonathan Eccles, Jack Larsen, Brady Priscorn, Landon Thomas. There's a lot of really.
Those are just the guys with offers.
Exactly. Yeah, I just wrote down the offer list. That's all I was doing there. It's crazy, man. You talked a little bit, Brian. We talked about this yesterday, just kind of texting back and forth. A lot of people have asked us many times about Bronte Johnson, who is in-state kid, obviously, out of the Fort Wayne area, north side, right? Fort Wayne north side, I believe. So he is 6'3", 170 pounds, listed pretty much everywhere as a wide receiver. I think maybe one publication has him as an athlete, but I watched some film of him yesterday and we were talking back and forth. I don't think he's a natural hands catcher at all, which tells me I probably prefer him on defense. And very interesting player, because although he's only 170 pounds, and I would love your insight on this from what you saw yesterday, I think that he has a legitimate growth potential. Like you could talk me into this kid potentially being a safety if he lands with Notre Dame, or a rover maybe down the line as well. Like I could see both those things happening. In-state kid just got his offer yesterday. We've been asked a ton about Bronte Johnson. What did you see from him yesterday in the defensive back drills and just him moving on the field?
They all list him as a receiver. I think what you're thinking of is ESPN hasn't ranked him yet. Is the reason there's only 3 that list him as a receiver so far.
I try not to listen to ESPN in general, but yes.
Good call. They all list him as a receiver, number 1 kid in the state of Indiana. Look, he's got a lot of receiver traits, but to me, the thing I like about him is he's a pretty loose athlete. The first thing about was he go by Tay, right? The first thing about Bronte is he goes by Tay. Right. The first thing about Tay is 6'3" guys. A lot of times, Ryan, we've talked about this with Cam Hart, can be a little tight-hipped by nature. Just the taller you are, sometimes I don't know what it is. Somebody can maybe explain it to me. That's did better in health classes or their profession speaks to. But I've just noticed that the taller you are, a lot of times, just you're not going to be quite as loose in the hips as not that you're tight, but you're tighter than a 5'11" guy. And not always, but that's kind of what you see at that position. He's really loose. He can move. He changes direction with ease, which is another difficult thing for a 6'3" kid to do. So watching him go through like Kyle Hamilton, right? Like 6'4", rangy from center field, but he's not going to look as quick going through a different box drill or 5 yards, 5 yards, 5 yards, 5 yards kind of, plant drive drill as a Tariq Bracy will. Doesn't necessarily mean he's not a better athlete. It just means that type of drill is more conducive to the smaller athlete, right? But he was handling that stuff really well when his technique was right, meaning he can physically do it with ease. He's just a super raw kid. like super raw player technically. He's going to have to do some work over the next couple of years, and that's why I'm glad Notre Dame got on him early, but there's work to be done in other areas if he's going to be a Notre Dame target. But he was coachable. I mean, you could hear him listening to Coach O'Leary and Coach Mickens. You could see him trying to implement the things they were trying to do. You could just tell he was starting with a much lower baseline from what he's been taught up to this point in time. He's just a natural athlete playing football. I mean, that's what he is. And so when you look at him, like, boy, when this kid gets some coaching, good night, he's going to be good. He's just really raw. But, Ryan, he is twitchy. He's explosive. And then I love the fact that even though Notre Dame's recruiting him as a DB, he still jumped in there and he wanted to get some receiver reps and one-on-ones. He just wanted to compete. He took a lot of reps. And at times he got beat because somebody could get him on a double move because he just, again, the technique's not there to get him out of position. But when it's just about you athletically and him athletically, you're going to have a tough time against him. Like, now the drawback is he's really narrow, like really narrow. He's going to have to fill out a lot. But athletically, compete level was good. He's just, like I said, there's some things to work on there, but there's a lot of tools to work with. Like, I know 247 ranks him number 34. On3 ranks him number 130. I think he's kind of closer, like to the middle, maybe leaning back into the top 100, simply because he's so raw. But just raw tools standpoint, like just God-given ability standpoint, he's a top 50 caliber guy. Mm-hmm. And I'm shocked at the Illinois and Indiana combined have some really good athletes in the 2024 class. And we had made a comment, like, I don't know if they can rank as high in 24 because there's not enough Northern talent. My opinion is starting to change a little bit as I see Cam Williams in person, as I see, maybe Bronte Johnson can be a legitimate candidate, as I see Mylan Graham in person. I know we were going to talk about him next. When I see Patrick Clax in person, I'm like, okay, this kid can play too. He's a teammate of Drake Bowen. That's 4 Midwestern Indiana, Illinois kids. And I'm like, those kids can play at Notre Dame. Now, you can't take them all, I don't think. Those kids can play at Notre Dame. Sure. And so it's like, Cam Williams is ranked high. Bronte Johnson's ranked high. Mylan Graham's not ranked high now, but he better be because he can play. Mm-hmm. So it's nice to see that, okay, is this a trend or just a couple 2-year, anomaly? I hope it's a trend because that's great for Notre Dame. But there were some Indiana kids on campus yesterday, and I'm going to be honest with you, I usually set a pretty low bar for Indiana kids. Just because you hear about them and see them work out, and you're like, okay. Like there was a kid from Indiana a couple years ago. It's been several years now. He ended up going to like Miami or Ball State or something like that, but he was really fast. He couldn't do anything else. Mm-hmm. Or a kid's really shifty but slow. And there's always something. But when I watched these kids, Cam Williams, Bronte, Mylan Graham, Patrick Clax, no, these kids are all good football players. Like they're legitimately good football players. So it was good to see him. And Bronte has as high of a ceiling as any of them, just from God-given ability. He has the most room to go from a learning how to play the game standpoint.
Yeah, and you mentioned Patrick Clax. Of course, he is the teammate of Drake Bowen, the 2023 linebacker commit to Notre Dame, a guy to keep an eye on. He's been to campus before as well. So, Brian, last couple guys I want to talk about, and then we'll talk about a few, maybe just hit on a couple of these new offers. We've already talked about Aeneas Williams. Bronte Johnson was a new offer over the weekend. One guy that I'm a little impressed by, man. I'm a little more than I was anticipating because I didn't know his name until yesterday, and you dropped his name, was Garrett Stover, who is the cousin of Cade Stover. Right. Went to Ohio State originally as a defensive player, was kind of like an edge linebacker hybrid, and now he's playing tight end for the University of Ohio State. And I didn't know anything about his cousin, to be honest with you. And I mean, I watched a film yesterday, and we talked about this morning. I see a lot of Pete Werner in his game right now. He's a 6'2", 200-pound athlete. If you watch his film, he's kind of playing safety, mid-hole, some on the second level, doing all types of stuff.
He's kind of doing what Jack Kaiser did as well in high school, and Pete Werner, but he's
and a little bit of Prince Kali too. Like they kind of all do the same thing.
Than Jack was. Yeah. So just so you all understand what that comp from Ryan means, Ryan loves Pete Werner, like rightfully so, loves Pete Werner. And I think he's not as long as Pete was in high school. Pete was taller. Garrett's thicker. than Pete was at the same age. But the explosiveness is there. The thing I loved about Pete coming out was he didn't look unnatural playing safety. Same with Jack Kaiser. Like Jack Kaiser playing free safety in high school looked natural playing. Now, he wasn't going to play at Notre Dame. Pete wasn't going to play that at Notre Dame. That's not the point. The point is, can you get there out there in the back of the defense and look natural, have the instincts to fly downhill, to flip your hips and do all those kind of things? And he did that. And his range is exceptional. I didn't know who he was because the problem yesterday was we didn't have a roster, which I don't know if they're allowed to do. I don't know if they're allowed to hand those out. That might be promoting whatever, some stupid NCAA rule. So we didn't get a roster, and they would put the name tags on the kids' helmets. Well, they didn't wear the flipping helmets the whole time. So I'm just like writing down 5, really, so I'm like writing notes, but I'm using their names, and then I would kind of afterwards try to find out who's who. Well, I'm seeing this number 5, and he was wearing number 5 in white, and I'm just in my notes, I'm like, this is a dude. And I went up to Vince because Vince was there yesterday too, and I'm like, dude, watch this kid. And he's going through these like these drills with James Laurinaitis, and it's like going around the ring and you're changing and you're playing, and he's just smoking people. His change of direction is tremendous. His explosiveness is tremendous. His physique is like, if I could build a rover in a lab, I'd maybe add another inch. Outside of that, Garrett Stover is kind of it. Somebody said, how does he compare to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah? My response was yes. Yes. Because remember, Jeremiah played a lot of safety early in his career in high school too. I would say Garrett is faster than Jeremiah. Similar explosiveness. That's a really good football player. I don't know I haven't looked at where he's ranked yet now. Don't care. Yeah. But he's a great player. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is he is at a school that's very pro Ohio State. He's got a relative that's already at Ohio State. Now, Notre Dame looked at Cade Stover and liked Cade Stover, and he liked Notre Dame. He visited Notre Dame as well. And then obviously the fact that this kid camped at Notre Dame, there's some level of interest. Ohio State's going to be very hard to beat, obviously. But I thought the same thing about Brendan Vernon. So we'll see. But take away the interest in Notre Dame aspect of it, because I don't have a lot to add there from a recruiting standpoint. All I can really add about him is the talent is really impressive, like really impressive. Like I'm not surprised he does. I think the part of the reason they wanted to wait to offer him, if I had to guess, is you see him on film, you're like, okay, he's going to be a linebacker, but what's his body like? Does he have the size to grow into a rover, that kind of thing? And the answer was from just walking up next to him, like, yep, okay, he's got that, right? Is he really 6'1.5", 6'2"? Yep, checks out. But the athleticism pops on film. It popped at camp yesterday, and he's doing it like a 6'1.5", 6'2" frame as a sophomore. So he was, he was without question in my top 5. I mean, he was in him, Caleb Beasley, Cam Williams, CJ Carr. I mean, those were the guys to me that yesterday really, really stood out for me yesterday. Caleb Beasley was the best kid at camp. I mean, he was the best kid there yesterday.
And we're going to talk about him in a second. Last thing I'll say about Stover is the comparison to Pete Werner for me is role they played in high school. And then I could see him starting as a rover if he comes to Notre Dame, but eventually moving maybe into will, because I think he has kind of a body that could eventually hold 225-ish.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Of course. Yeah.
Because this is going to determine something. When you talk about him being a will, are you talking about he can go play will, or he may have to go play will?
I not have to.
You know what I mean by that, right? Like,
he
can't stay at rover. Like, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah could have moved to will, I think, if he needed to. Like, sure. Like, Drew Tranquil could have stayed at rover. He was really good there, but he was better at will. I'm just trying to, where some guys, I'm like, I don't know if that guy can play rover, so you got to move him to will. When you say that, are you thinking he can be great at both? If the need is greater at will, he can move there, or do you think he may outgrow or not be able to stick in space?
I think it's similar to a Drake Bowen for me, because I think that Drake, like if Drake stays around 215-ish, he could play rover all day, but I think that his body may be 230-ish eventually, right? So I think he's going to outgrow Will eventually, because we're talking about Garrett Stover. I mean, he just finished up his sophomore season and he's 6'2", 200 pounds. Like he's probably going to be 215 before, by his senior year, 215, 220. So I think he's going to be a bigger athlete. Eventually.
To me, seeing him in person, he's a little bit leaner than Drake was.
Okay.
So he's not quite as thick as Drake was. I do think he has more of a Jack Kaiser type of frame, a little thicker than Jack was the same age, but more of a more similar frame to Jack than Drake, just for me seeing him in person. but the athleticism is there. There's no question about it.
Yeah. And I love the combination of comfortability in space. I think when you watch his film, he comes to balance and he's pretty physical in a lot of ways. I mean, Pete Warner was a kid, Brian, if you remember correctly, like he played the Big Sam, like kind of rover position at Ohio State before he moved inside because the other linebacker, Baron Browning, couldn't play inside. So they're like, we got to put you in space type of thing. So last guy that you just highlighted, probably the most impressive player of the day was Caleb Beasley, defensive back, who I know Notre Dame is very high on. I've talked to him a few times. He's a great young man. Checked in with him this morning. He is excited about everything that he was able to accomplish yesterday. He thinks that he kind of put his best foot forward.
Yeah.
Your general impressions of Caleb Beasley.
If he has another level of football than what we showed yesterday, I can't wait to see it.
Top 10 player in the country.
I mean, he was phenomenal yesterday. And it was funny. I put a tweet out yesterday and I said, arguably the best player at camp. And I try to say things like that out of respect for other kids, but also maybe I watched him more than I watched some other kid. Maybe somebody saw a kid that he thought was better, whatever. There's always discussion to be had, usually discussion that you can have with those kind of things. And my guy, Tim O'Malley, responds, he's like, yeah, I'm not here to argue. It's like, nope. He was really good. And he looked great in drills. He's a little bigger than I thought he was going to be, Ryan. Like, I think in articles we have listed him at 6 foot, like 175 pounds, because that's what he's listed as. He looked 180 to 185-ish to me, like really athletic kid, like not as big as Justin Rhett, but like a similar-ish type of frame. But he started to stand out in drills, right? That's the first place you notice him. And he's just really easy pedal, right? Plant and drive is excellent. Flips his hips with ease. Natural in coverage. And then you see it. So you're already like, he's checking all the boxes athletically, right? I mean, doing all those kind of things. I knew you were going to respond to that comment about people. I'm just waiting to hear when it comes. But back to Caleb Beasley, just really effortless. And that's what I like as a corner. I want a guy that's effortless. And when you watched him cover guys, and I'm talking about cover some good players, it's like he was running at a speed that was kind of different than everybody else. Meaning like, okay, imagine if I went and raced Braden Lenzy, right? Braden would be kind of like jogging, like taunting me the whole time. Like he might even turn like backwards a little bit, like back pedal, taunting me the whole time because he would crush me, right? I'm kind of using this as like a funny type of thing where, that's kind of how I viewed how he was playing cornerback yesterday, Ryan, is it was like he was toying with people. He was just playing at a different speed than everybody else was playing at. And that was something that I thought really stood out to me against some good players, meaning like he's locking them down without even like really trying. Now, here's why that's important. If you've got easy speed and easy movement, right, then what you're going to do is you're going to then say, okay, if you do a double move on me, I don't have to overreact because, I'm confident not only in my ability, but I'm also confident in, the Ryan, can you check on that, what they're talking about in the chat? Are you confident in your ability to play? Are you able to go out and move with ease? I'm not going to bite on a double move. I'm going to be able to be all over a comeback because I can play in phase without exerting myself more, right? And it was an easy speed. It was easy change of direction, just mirroring all these. It was just so clean. And he wasn't even like, when I say he wasn't trying, Ryan, it comes across as like he wasn't giving effort. It was just that almost like he had to slow himself down because he was so much better than who he was going against. That's what I'm referring to. And it was one of the more impressive cornerback performances that I've seen at Irish Invasion. And we've seen some really good cornerbacks come through here over the years. So, I was very impressed by what I saw. There's no doubt about it.
There was one play in particular, Brian, that I saw of Beasley where again, those kids that are 6'1.5", somewhere in that ballpark, a little bit of a higher cut cornerback, they usually don't change directions really well. There was one where I think it was just like an inside breaking route where I was just like, that, all right, that's a little different, that change of direction, right? So yeah, man, I'm all the way in on Caleb Beasley. I think that he is a player who I have not seen, at least from a physical perspective. I mean, there's a lot of good corners, it seems, in the 2024 cycle. The Emilio Edgard kid out of Pennsylvania. You had Desmond Ricks that's down in IMG, and Ellis Robinson, who is a guy that Notre Dame has offered out of IMG. There's a lot of really talented cornerbacks. Man, Beasley looks about as physically impressive as anybody in the country right now, in my opinion.
There's a lot of kids I need to see still, right? So I'm not comfortable yet saying where he should rank among the other corners. What I'll say is I can look at a kid and say, that's a top 200 guy, that's a top 100 guy, that's a top 50 guy, just in what a top 50 guy looks like from having done this for as long as I have. Right. Caleb Beasley's a top 50 football player, easily. And so, to me, I mean, that's and here's the other thing too, Ryan, from a recruiting standpoint, his mom and dad were both there, rocking Notre Dame gear, like loving things. I talked to Smitty yesterday. He saw Caleb at an event. I can't remember where he saw him because Brian travels everywhere to watch these events, right? Like one week he's in Texas, the next week he's in Louisiana. He's in like, dude, where are you? Like, I'm back home in Florida. Oh, okay. You remember where you live, right? Like that's what I love about Smitty. He's always going to these events. And so he talks to these kids and meets these kids and all that kind of stuff. To me, he said that this is before yesterday. That is a Notre Dame kid if I've ever met one. Like just everything. And Brian's been doing this way longer than I have. And, he said, look, I mean, everything about the kid is Notre Dame. And then when you see his family pro Notre Dame, again, Alabama wants him, Georgia wants him, Tennessee wants him. I'm not saying Notre Dame's a lock to get him. What I'm saying is this is an elite player that you were going to have a shot at. Now you just got to go close because, I mean, he interacted with Coach Mickens really well, and Coach Freeman was all over him. And you could just tell that Notre Dame loved that kid, wants that kid. Now it's about closing because he is a fit at Notre Dame, an incredible fit. And you could just watch his dad. This dad's a big guy, and his dad was just glowing yesterday watching. His mom was having a good time. Notre Dame was loving on him. Now it's about closing the deal, right? And that's going to be the key. It's going to be the key.
Yeah, and just to quickly run through it again, Aeneas Williams was a young man who had a offer extended yesterday. Mylan Graham, wide receiver.
Loved Mylan Graham yesterday too.
Yeah. Well, I know he was one of the very talented receivers. Kobe Howard, who is a 2025 I said that again for a third time. 2025 wide receiver who received an offer yesterday. Very talented receiver in his own right. Garrett Stover was offered, who we hit on a little bit a second ago, and Bronte Johnson, an in-state wide receiver out of the where is he from again? Oh no, Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
Fort Wayne is
Mylan and Bronte are both Fort Wayne kids. New Haven's like right outside of Fort Wayne.
Yep. So those are the new offers, Brian. Also mixed in with the Irish invasion were a couple important visitors for Notre Dame on the offensive line, specifically talking about Elijah Page, talented offensive tackle out of Pinnacle in Arizona, and Joe Otting, a offensive lineman out of Kansas, Hayden High School out there in Kansas. Two players we've been asked about a lot, two players that I think we both like for a lot of different reasons. Joe is more of an interior player, while Elijah is a true offensive tackle type. But we've been hearing a lot of great things from both parties. I guess let's start with Elijah Page, Brian. He's a really talented player, obviously out of the state of Arizona, like I already indicated. I think that Notre Dame put their best step forward, put out a piece this morning.
Well, you're prefacing this to ask me a question. You're the one that talks to him. So let me flip the script. Ryan, flip the script. You had a chance to talk to Elijah, right? I've heard great things about how it went. You've talked to him, right? Sure. He's a very open kid. He's a very outgoing kid. I really like that kid. You've talked to him. I've told you what I've heard from my sources. You tell me what you've heard. You tell everybody what you heard because you had a chance to talk to him yesterday about how the visit went and what things stood out. Because this was a big visit, Ryan. We talked about this. Like they were going to be a player for him, but if they're going to really have a chance to close, they had to knock it out of the park this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they had to. It was the first time that Elijah Page was on campus in South Bend, right? So naturally, you have to, I mean, you can have as much interest as possible, but until you get on campus and you can see yourself there, it's not a tangible thing. I think Elijah came to campus and he mentioned, the usual things, getting the campus tour, talking to some players, talking to coaches, all that good stuff. I think him sitting down with Coach Heastand in the film room and being able to watch film on himself and the other players on campus, I think that really stuck with him a ton. He really, I think, took to the coaching of Harry Heastand. And one of the main things that he told me was, and I asked him pretty much straight up, like, Arizona's a far away from South Bend, Indiana, like some guys just aren't willing to make that trip. Distance is not a factor in Elijah Page's recruitment, which that points up to Notre Dame, right? If it's not a factor, you like the school, you just had a great visit, you're an academically driven kid. All those things point that Notre Dame is going to be in the conversation here. I think they are. I think Notre Dame is making a strong push. I know we've had a couple questions on the numbers of offensive line class and all that, and it's a great conversation to have. Me and Brian actually just had that conversation this morning. All I'm going to tell you is Notre Dame likes him a lot. Notre Dame is going to push hard for him down the stretch here, and I think that they are in the driver's seat here. I think that you left this visit feeling very good about your chances with Elijah Page.
Yeah, and my sources feel the same way. They feel like they did well. Now, look, he's got some other visits scheduled, and that's going to factor in, right? And so now it's about closing the deal. But yes, they have done a good job there. Very, very good job there. So, Ryan, I did put that on the board. I was able to confirm that. So we'll say it now. CJ Carr, the player we talked about, I flat out said it. We know where he was at. On Thursday, he's going to, at 7:00 p.m., he will be making his college announcement. We're not going to dive into that anymore other than to let you know we will have a live show at 7:00 that day. So I think y'all know what that means. And no, I do not believe there's any conversation about him reclassifying to 2023, y'all. They're still recruiting Dante Moore. They love Dante Moore. Dante Moore's not afraid of competition, and neither CJ Carr. That's what you want in a great quarterback. So anyway, so that is something we can confirm, and it's big time. And I think there will be others to follow soon after. I'll just leave it at that, right? And I don't think he'll be the only commitment this week. And then that's all I'm saying on the subject, right? So just to tease y'all enough, I don't think he'll be the only kid that pops this week. So
yeah.
Don't you hate it when I do that? Because I'm not going to tell you who it is. Ryan knows who it is, but it's going to be a fun week for Notre Dame. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
We're going to be busy this week. Not only potential commitments, but also prepping for the June 10th weekend, right, which is going to be
big weekends coming up, brother.
It's going to be bananas, man. But yeah, I mean, going back to Elijah Page here for a second, you feel good about where Notre Dame is with him. Obviously, I feel good about where Notre Dame is with him. They have to close because, like you said, there's a couple visits that still need to happen.
Right.
But Notre Dame is pushing, and they're pushing hard for Elijah Page right now.
The other thing that I gathered too is he checked out physically a lot bigger than they thought than he was on film and as a junior. Like apparently he's really filled out in the upper body. Like he's really had a growth spurt. Here's another thing to factor in. You always get nervous about a kid who was highly ranked, whose career so far hasn't panned out, who's from the same high school as another kid you're recruiting. And let's be honest, Tosh Baker's a top 100 kid, and his career hasn't panned out. And we've talked about reasons why. He still has a chance, right? He still has a chance to be that guy, and he's going to keep working. But how's he going to view Notre Dame? And from everything I've heard, and Elijah has not been shy about saying it, I think he said it to you, but he said it to others, like Tosh loves Notre Dame and loves Coach Heastand, which has helped. So when a backup offensive lineman is telling you, I love the coaching and I love it here, and I'm a former top 100 recruiter who's not playing, I think that says a lot about the health of the program right now when you talk about the other players. And that is being told a lot to recruits. Like the culture here is so much different, better, all those types of things. So
agree.
Yeah, they've done a good job. And Joe Otting was on campus this weekend too, Ryan. He was actually working out at camp. And it went really well. He checked all the boxes he needed to check for Notre Dame. He physically was the size they wanted him to be, was really excellent in drills, athletic, coachable, all that. So he checked all those boxes as well.
Well, we talked about the verification process for some of these 2024 and 2025 kids that got offered this weekend. It was also a verification of Joe Otting, right? Because although he already had an offer and Coach Easton had already been down to
he did not have a guaranteed spot in this class going into the workout.
Yeah,
from what we were told, he had to earn it.
Yeah, exactly. And Otting camped out this weekend to showcase that he belongs at Notre Dame, to show that he has the body type and has the physicality and has all those makings, and he impressed. And he did.
He did. He did it. Yeah. No, they loved him, and he checked all the boxes. And look, here's two schools that want this kid bad: Notre Dame and Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard somebody say, "Why would you take a kid with an unimpressive offer list?" I'm sorry, but unless you want to add Alabama to that list, two of the top there's five. There's now not even five because I don't know about the new Georgia coach, but there's four programs right now who, if their offensive line coach offers a kid, I'm paying attention. Texas, simply because of Kyle Flood. Alabama, because they've been able to produce really good lines for a long time. Notre Dame, and Iowa. Well, half those schools are looking at Joe Otting hard. And, it's good enough for me. So,
yeah. He did everything he had to this weekend, folks. We feel very good about, we felt good about, hey, going into the visit, or the camp, I should say, if Joe Otting impressed and Notre Dame pushed, that we feel good about where they stood with Joe Otting, because Joe Otting really likes Notre Dame.
Great fit. Doubt. Family loves, he's a good fit. He's a good fit. So now it's just about figuring out all the numbers and stuff. So
Exactly.
We went a little long, Ryan, on today's show for that part of the show. So let's hold off on the rest of the O-line, how it all fits, until after Monroe Freeling and gets on campus this weekend, and we're able to see kind of how that goes. Let's kind of see and some other things kind of progress over the next week, so we can talk. So we're going to push that part off until next week. But we were able to, at least the important stuff, the pertinent stuff of how did Elijah Page's visit go, and how did it go with Joe Otting, I think are the two important things. So we will talk Thursday. I think will be good to talk about the CJ Carr situation a little bit further on Thursday, sort of previewing that PM show along with some other topics. So I think we'll have another recruiting show probably Thursday. How about that? That's the kind of the plan right now. We'll do some team stuff the next couple of days. So what I want to do now, Ryan, is I want to dive into some questions, because we did have some questions from people. We had a lot of good questions today. Let's dive into those here as we kind of wrap up our show with our sort of our daily mailbag, and we'll obviously answer a lot of recruiting questions, because that's what most of them were. But if you have some team questions and things like that you want to throw in there, you can go ahead and do that as well.
Yeah. Wanted to start just with a super chat real quick from Garrett Knudsen. IB Nation, always setting the standard. Thanks for today's show, breaking down the past weekend. 10K subscribers before season starts. Let's get it. Keep up the O-line talk. Aaron, appreciate you so much for that super chat, my friends. We're going to go to Rob Osgood. Hey, folks, thanks for the intel on the boards. Great info about CJ Carr being the 2024 class. Would a early commitment affect Dante Moore? I would love to have both, but in your eyes, how would you proceed? Brian, we had a lot of questions about this layer of how I guess we can phrase it as, does CJ Carr potentially committing to Notre Dame affect Dante Moore? Does Dante Moore care about that? I guess let's just make sense of if either side really cares if the other commits.
I don't. It just rarely does, especially since Dante's the older one. I think if it was going to impact anybody negatively, it would impact CJ more than Dante, because CJ is going to look at it like, well, Dante's going to have a year head start on me. So it usually impacts the younger guy more than the older guy. It just, look, the thing is if Dante Moore is the kind of guy that's going to be afraid to compete against CJ Carr, then you don't want him. If CJ Carr is the kind of kid that's going to be afraid to compete against Dante Moore, then you don't want him. Because the flip side is, let's just say Notre Dame does land Dante Moore. Then what's the question we're going to get asked in this chat? Are we now worried about CJ decommitting, right? That's the conversation. Guys, these are ultimate competitors. Dante Moore is not taking June visits this month because he wants to compete at 7-on-7s around the country. Why? What does he have to prove? because he loves to compete, right? If he didn't want to compete, he wouldn't be doing these camps because there's always a risk of you failing and losing or not being successful. He's not going to be afraid of competing, right? He's just not. So if Dante Moore still believes Notre Dame is the best place for him, he'll still pick Notre Dame. He's not gonna be afraid of that. So, I know that's the narrative that people like to think, but the reality is that's just not how it goes, right? And if Dante Moore does pick someone else, it's not because he's afraid to compete against CJ Carr, because every single school that he's looking at is going to have somebody just as good as CJ Carr ahead of him, not behind him, ahead of him. Again, Walker Howard at LSU, Connor Wegman at Texas A&M, Jake Garcia at Miami, Ty Thompson at Oregon. Those are the schools he's looking at, right? So the only way that I could buy that he's afraid to compete is if he goes to Michigan. Even Michigan State, they drafted they got the kid drafted. They got the kid from St. John Bosco last year who was a top 150 caliber quarterback, top 100 caliber quarterback, I think, on SI 99. So he's not afraid of competition. If he's not afraid of that, of guys who have a head start on him, he's not going to be afraid of somebody behind him. Right.
Well,
I mean,
that was
just not.
that was my main thing. Is I could see someone being more looking forward than looking backward. I mean, why am I worried about the rear view? I have a year on this kid, right? In on being on campus and being a part of the program. If anything, it would be CJ Carr looking forward and saying like, oh man, they have Dante. There's a log jam. They have Buckner. They have Dante. They're recruiting great at quarterback. There might be a little bit of a log jam. I don't think that either is going to be the instance though. So it's a good question, Rob. I don't think that it really is pertinent to either player, to be honest. Shane, I'm going to pull up your question real quick. We are not going to cover it now because we're going to cover this later.
Can I say something real quick first?
Of course. Yes.
What I will say is this. If all things are equal, a depth chart can be a determining factor. And it should be. I mean, it should. If like you are having, if you just, I love this school and I love this school and I've gone through they both check this, they both check that. The coaching is great. I'm just having a hard time. Then depth chart can be a factor, but that's not about being afraid to compete. That's just about weighing all the data and making an informed decision. And so sometimes depth chart is going to have an impact, but it's normally because it's sort of like a tiebreaker amongst schools I really like. If you like this school better than this school, you're not going to then flip it because of the depth chart. That'd be a foolish decision. And most kids aren't that silly. They're just not, especially not winners. I mean, winners aren't that silly. And, I mean, Tua went to Alabama and they had just had Jalen Hurts right before him.
Who went to a national championship.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And Mac Jones signed in that class as well and waited 4 years really, started in his 4th year to get his chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just the way it goes. So Joe Burrow went to Ohio State, knowing he'd have to compete against Dwayne Haskins and vice versa, right? I mean, that's just the way it goes, guys. I mean, that's just, and then you battle, and if you lose out on your job and you go somewhere else, you go somewhere else. It's all good, right? Justin Fields went to Georgia knowing Jake Fromm had just led them to the national title game the year before.
Right.
Now, it didn't work out, and he transferred, and I'm okay with that. You want your chance to go play, go play. But most of these kids are not afraid of competition, y'all. They're just not.
No.
Trevor Lawrence went to Clemson knowing Hunter Johnson was there. And this is before we all knew that he stunk, but he was a 5-star quarterback.
And they just made a national championship with Kelly Bryant too, hadn't they? The year before,
Kelly Bryant, led him to number 1 seed in 2017.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think that's an inherent thing that needs to make you a really good quarterback is that you're not afraid of that stuff, right? Like you're the guy. Like you have to have kind of that confidence working with you, where you are the guy because you're a leader. So yeah, I agree completely. I wanted to bring up this one for Shane. Shane, I'm going to read it right now, but bring this back to us because we're actually going to have like pretty much a whole show about this. Is it possible for Notre Dame to take 6 on the offensive line, say Page, Otting, Jagasaw commits, and Freeling decides later? Would they still take Freeling? It's a great question. Me and Brian talked about it extensively this morning. We're going to give this one the attention that it truly does deserve because it's a great question, Shane. So bring it back to us at a later date.
I'll just say this one thing, Ryan, and this is why we don't want to get into specifics. I'm pretty confident the Notre Dame is not going to take 6.
Mm-hmm.
But it just, what's the makeup of the 5 going to be? That's the question. And so, like I said, we want to hold off on that until after Monroe Freeling visits, and we can kind of get a read for how it went with him, because that's going to be part of it too, right? Like if let's see how it goes with him. And, and then you make some moves. So just, that's all we'll say for now is we just want to wait till, we could tell you a lot of things, y'all, but it's just not going to be as informed as it needs to be because one kid just visited and the other kid hasn't visited yet for the official. And I just think that it would be just too soon. So trust me, this is a great question, Shane. As Ryan said, we'll dive into it next week. But the reason why is because we just want to let those, we know where Notre Dame stands with Jagasol. We don't need a final visit for that. We feel good about it. But with Freeling, I feel like there's a lot more at stake in that visit. And that's why we want to just wait till that one happens until we really dive into that conversation.
Absolutely. Now, Shane, it's a great question. Literally, me and Brian had a phone call about that earlier. So, yes, it's a great question. Fantastic. We're going to move to Matt McCarthy, who says, is Caleb Downs a long shot to pick with Notre Dame similar to Richard Young, or is it a scenario, can't speak, where University of Georgia and Alabama are the favorites at this moment, but it wouldn't be shocking if Downs picked Notre Dame at the end?
I would not call him. I would differentiate between Downs and Richard Young. Mm-hmm. I would. I don't think they're going to get either of them, but I would be less shocked if Caleb Downs picked Notre Dame. I think Caleb Downs like Notre Dame a lot. Like a lot. He's making his 4th visit to campus.
Right.
He's a high academic kid. It's just, I think at the end of the day, one school has a better track, 2 schools have a better track record of consistently putting guys in the NFL from the positions he wants to play. I think that's really what it boils down to. And distance. His brother's in North Carolina, his dad's in Tennessee, coaching, doing his thing. I just think those things are going to factor in. But as we said last week, just because a kid picks another school doesn't mean he doesn't love the other schools that he didn't pick. I think Caleb really likes Notre Dame a lot. I just think at the end of the day, Georgia and Alabama are in a better position. But if Notre Dame wins that one, I won't be shocked. I'll be shocked if they land Richard Young. It'd be a good shock. And it's not because Richard Young doesn't fit at Notre Dame or any of that stuff. It's just they got in it. I mean, they became a player. So it's hard to go from outside the top 7 to number 1 without some things happening. But that's I might be less shocked over the next month if certain things happen, and we'll dive into those as they happen. And they're about schools filling up and that kind of thing at that position than anything else.
Yeah, no, and I mean, Caleb Downs has been on the board, and he is, it's kind of been. I mean, he's had interest in Notre Dame, like you said. He's been to school, he's been to the campus multiple times. When Richard Young confirmed the official visit, that was a shock to us. Like, let's be honest about it, right? Like, we were like, whoa, that's weird. Caleb Downs coming back to campus is not a shock to us. We know that he has some interest. Is it enough?
He's got a lot of interest. Right.
Exactly. So it's Richard Young would be a long shot. Caleb Downs would be a surprise, is how I would kind of maybe label those.
It'd be, I'll put it like, one is an upset. Mm-hmm. One is a shocker. Like getting Richard Young is like App State beating Michigan.
Sure.
Notre Dame getting Caleb Downs is sort of like Ohio State beating Bama in 2014. Right? I mean, yeah, I was surprised by that. And Bama was up big early, and Ohio State came back and put it away late, right? Like, but you're not shocked that Bama beat. It was an upset, though, right? But you're not shocked that they beat Bama, but it was an upset. So that's what I would say. Maybe not App State beating them. I think that's probably unfair to Coach McCullough and the staff, but it's a pretty big surprise. It'd be a pretty big surprise. It'd be like an unranked team beating, Pitt beating, how about this? Pitt beating Clemson in 2016. How about that? Mm-hmm. A decent team, decent shot, but no one expected them to beat Clemson at Clemson. It's more of that kind of, wow, that's a big upset. It's a big upset. No question.
Yeah, I'm filtering some questions, Brian, because we had a lot of questions about CJ Carr, even before CJ Carr announced that he's making his decision on Thursday. So just want to pull this last one up about CJ's situation from John Leahy. I wanted to just go buzz through this one real quick. Would Notre Dame take CJ Carr's commitment before a Dante Moore decision? And if so, how would it affect Dante Moore's recruitment? We covered the second part of that. We don't think that it's going to affect Dante Moore's decision if CJ Carr does select Notre Dame on Thursday. All I'm going to say about this is, yes, they would take his commitment from CJ Carr before Dante Moore.
You don't have to worry about whether or not Notre Dame would or would not take his commitment if that were the decision on Thursday.
Exactly.
Not saying it is, but yeah.
Yeah. We don't see Dante Moore making a decision before Thursday. Yeah. So in the happenstance that CJ does pick Notre Dame, then that would be a reality that happens. So, John, appreciate the question. We're going to go to Kellen Cohorst, excuse me. Are there any updates on Ryan Wingo? Last time I talked to Wingo, I actually talked to his the head coach for his high school. So the story here is it seemed like Notre Dame was kind of really focused on the 2023 class, and they were kind of not talking to a bunch of 2024 wide receivers at the time. So Ryan didn't hear from them for a couple weeks. And since that, they've heard from him very often, a couple times a week now. They're checking in on Ryan Wingo out of the Missouri area, who's one of the top receivers, maybe the top receiver in the 2024 class. It's very arguable in that instance. So they're making him a priority. And all I'll say is after talking to his coach, I believe that this kid is absolutely a Notre Dame fit if Notre Dame is able to land him. It's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of teams after him from the Ohio States down to the SEC schools. But Ryan Wingo is a very talented player who is a high academic kid as well. So no huge update, except for that there is interest and he is a good fit for Notre Dame, in my opinion.
Yep. So Ryan, I'm gonna grab this next one because I think this is an interesting one here.
Okay.
I want to kind of get your thoughts on this because I've kind of talked a lot about this, but I want to hear kind of what you have to say about it. And it's because it's like one of the two things we always hear about, right? Like number one is quarterback recruiting, and the other one is NIL. So I'm going to bring up this question from Brandon K. And he says, so since you have outlined what you think should happen with NIL, what do you think will actually happen? Will the NCAA do something or are we stuck? I think I've kind of made my opinion known on this, of the fact that I don't think the NCAA is going to do a gosh darn thing. But I want to get your opinion because I've talked a lot about this, right? Like number one is like, do you agree with me about what NIL should be? It should be about the players that are on the team. It should be or are you okay with the enticement? I mean, you're allowed to disagree with me. And then what do you think the NCAA will do, if anything, about all this?
I mean, am I supposed to have faith in the NCAA doing something with foresight? I mean, we've already gotten past that, right? I mean, we talked about this, Brian, in the one show. I think both of us could have predicted that once NIL was on the table, that there was going to be some repercussions from a recruiting side of things, right? There was going to be some type of enticement that was going to happen in that regard. So I don't have any confidence that the NCAA is going to do much. My point of this is that there needs to be some type of formatting of the NIL thing, right? Like I want, and I've wanted for a long time, college athletes to get paid for the name, image like this. I am all for that. All I'm going to say is the system that is currently here, or lack thereof, it's not working. It's not working. This is not what NIL was meant for. This is a pay for play at this point, right? Like this isn't them making money because a company looked at them and said, your brand would be very good for our brand. So we're going to give you money to display our brand, right? Display our brand, excuse me. So I don't have any, I think that it's a slippery slope, but there has to be some type of stipulations that are part of it. And I have no confidence in the NCAA doing anything anytime soon about it.
And if a company feels that a high school kid could bring value to them, then they should be allowed to sign that high school kid to a deal. But it cannot in any way, shape, form, or fashion be determined by where he goes to school. So if a Tennessee booster, Miami booster says, hey, man, we can give you $2 million. If they talk about if you come to Tennessee, violation. You're done. You're not eligible to go there, right? If you take that money. You can still go to Tennessee, but you can't take any money. Can't take any money.
Sure.
Or you can go to, you can take the money and then go somewhere. As long as they start doing something like that, I'm also okay with these big name high school kids, like, that everybody knows, and there's popular kids, and these companies may find that a kid brings value to their company, but it cannot be tied to a specific school. So if you're a Texas A&M booster and you want to give a kid a $2 million deal, that's fine, but you need to sign him before he signs to college. And that money needs to go where, so the deal you sign with him is fine, but you have to do that before he signs with a college. You can't offer him, it's tied into a college, right? So if you're going to offer him that deal, he can sign it whenever the heck he wants beforehand, and it can't be tied into a school. So if you offer a kid $2 million and, and you're a Texas A&M booster and you sign that kid, he can go to any school he wants to and still be that. That's the risk you run, for going after a high school kid, but it cannot be an inducement. And if you take it away because a kid picks another school, that's a violation. and you're going to get in trouble with the NCAA. That's what needs to happen. But I have zero faith, Ryan, that that's going to happen. And I think that's where you're getting at. Like, yeah, there's a lot of things that should happen, but that would assume that the NCAA is responsible and competent and has any interest in doing this. And they've gone from one extreme to another, like this and stupidly insane view of amateurism. And Sean and I talked about this on Saturday. I'm a big proponent of amateurism, big proponent, because I don't think these kids should be. I don't think these kids should be employees. I don't.
Right.
There's a lot of drawbacks to that people don't want to consider. So I don't want them. I don't want them to not be amateurs. But I don't think amateurism is tied to you can never profit from, certain things.
Agree.
So, I just I have no faith it's going to change.
Nope. I have zero faith that it's going to change. So it's something that we're going to continue to talk about because it is real world and it is not changing. And I think that is the really disappointing part of the fact that I think a lot of people could have predicted that some things were going to happen in this regard, right? Some pay for play, some enticement, but there was no foresight in this conversation. So want to move on we'll go to Coach Brent 574. Which will happen first? Number one recruiting class for Notre Dame using the 247 composite or any of the 4 services, or a national championship. So, Brian, is Notre Dame going to sign the number one class in a particular cycle on any of the major recruiting platforms, or are they winning a national championship first?
Boy, any of the major platforms, so any of the 4 services, that better include SI 99 and not ESPN. Otherwise, you need to jump that up to 5. But I will say this. Since I consider SI All-American one of the 4 services to be discussed there, I care a whole lot more about their rankings than I do ESPN's. I would say that the national championship would have to happen in 2022, like this season, for that to not be the case. Because I think that Notre Dame has a pretty good shot. If it's just one of the services, that I think they have a good shot at landing the number 1 class in 2023. And so now if you're going to say all of them, I still think it's going to be tougher for Notre Dame to sign the number 1 class just because of how lack of trust I have in this. I mean, Drake Bowen's going to continue to fall. If Brandon Vernon started like floating out like false rumors about him flipping Ohio State, and his ranking would go back up again. If he let that drag out for a couple months, if he took visits, his ranking would go up again. Sadly, that's the nature of this animal. And so because Notre Dame's filled up so early, you're going to just see more and more of those kids fall. It's stupid, but it's going to fall. The reason I like the way that SI All-American does it is because it's more of a subjective ranking. They take into account need, fit, how you built the class, all, depth of talent across the board, and then come to a decision on evaluation, not just a points-based system where Texas Tech can have the number 1 ranked class for half the time. And so that would be my stance.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. I'll say this. I think everybody that ends up in Notre Dame's class should just decommit and say that they're going to go to Alabama for like a couple weeks. And then right before signing day, then they should all sign. Right. So then they'd all skyrocket. Notre Dame would have 18 5-stars at that point, but yes, no. All joking aside, sort of. But yeah. I still realistically do think that Notre Dame has a chance to fight for the number 1 ranked spot in the 2023 cycle, though. So we'll see what happens. But I'll lean towards the recruiting first, I guess, because again, I'm kind of optimistic, but may end up being a push. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. Maybe it'll be a 20.
And then the other thing is like, okay, which signing day would it be? Do they have to be number 1 ranked after the December signing day, or do they have to then hold it into February? Because then that goes into the timing thing. But I would imagine it'd have to be the February one, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I said it would have to. If Notre Dame would have to win a title this year, to your point, Ryan, they'd have to win a title in January to win a title before getting a number 1 class. If they do finish with the number 1 ranked class.
It's very true. Timing is very important there. Yeah, I would agree, though. It has to be the February one because otherwise, it's not a complete class. So, yeah, right. Agree. We're going to move on to – this is an interesting one, Brian. Start earlier from Rob Osgood. said, in your opinion, what group, providing who we get this year, needs numbers in the 2024 class? I don't like numbers rather than talent, but what is the highest need group? Hope that made sense. Thanks. Yeah, Rob. No, it makes total sense. You're saying based upon what numbers Notre Dame is potentially getting positionally this year in 2023, what, and kind of having some forecast of what the roster is going to look like after the 2023 season. What are the important spots for Notre Dame to land in the 2024 recruiting class? Well,
So
my
he
answer
asked you
would,
about
yeah.
numbers. I guess I got a little bit thrown off by the numbers versus talent thing. Is he focusing on what's the biggest from a numbers from a need
I
standpoint or
think he's
talent?
saying from a volume perspective, what
Okay.
positions have the most need is what I'm taking from it.
Okay.
So,
What would your answer be, Ryan?
I mean, I think you have to look to the positions that have a usual high volume to begin with, right? So that's offensive line, that's defensive line, and we're not going to group cornerbacks and safeties together, but usually there's bigger numbers of wide receivers in some years. I'd probably say offensive line because I'm trying to think, right? So after the
You're going to
2023
probably,
season,
are you thinking you're probably going to need another 4-man class next year? Is that what you're saying?
probably, yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking 4. I mean, if Notre Dame does go 5 this year, I think you could still get to a 4-man class next year because you have to have, again, some foresight with, is Blake Fisher going to be there in 2024? Is Joe Alt going to be there in 2024? Andrew Kristofic's probably going to be off the roster at that point. Maybe Zeke Correll. Like, you're going to be losing some guys, right? So offensive line is my immediate one. Thinking about defensive line too. I think like those are the ones that are in my head, like are butting back and forth a little bit, right? The defensive line versus the offensive line. It's the typical ones though. It's the ones where you usually get a high volume of offensive linemen and defensive linemen. So that's kind of my initial thought though. Because it's not going to be quarterback, obviously. It's not going to be running back. You're probably going to get 2 at most in most classes for a running back perspective. Maybe 4 receivers, depending on how this shakes out this year.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm going to be honest about something.
Yeah.
I am emphatically, belligerently against ever taking 6 offensive linemen in a class. But I believe for every rule, there's got to be an exception. I honestly, looking at the 2024 offensive line class, it's a good class early, but it's. I would just say I would take 6 linemen in this class if I could get them. And it's rare, and I would say that, but I think there's a couple enough guys, Pendleton, Otting, Page, that are projectable guys. And there's enough guys like Freeling and Jagasol who are maybe play really early kind of guys that could be in a similar boat to Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, that you could get some separation there and then take 3 next year. That's what I would do, which I say that to answer my question of, which is why I think D-line could end up being the biggest class next year. In that you signed 5 O-linemen last year. If you sign 5 again this year, and I think they're going to get to 5, it could be smaller group next year. Whereas I think they need another 4+ D-line class next year, because I think you're going to see some departures from the current roster. You're going to see some guys go pro, stuff like that, to where, I mean, it's not a guarantee Riley Mills is still going to be on campus when the 2024 class shows up, right?
Sure.
The Adam Muellers are gone. I mean, what's crazy is Tyson Ford will be a junior when that class shows up. The kid's never played it, never.
That's nutty.
Right. That's just, so I think I'm going to go D-line. If we're not going to include the secondary together, then I'm going to go D-line.
Yeah, I don't think it's right to include safety and corner together, even though it can be interchangeable sometimes, but I'm just not going to do it.
I think for this type of conversation, we could, for the same reason that we would put D-line together. It's not the same because D tackles and D ends have to play together, where secondary is a little bit different. But I think for this type of conversation, you could, but I'm comfortable not doing so, to be honest with you. I'm comfortable keeping it the way that we have.
I guess one thing that I want to see with the secondary also is, do you get to a third safety? Do you get to 2 corners? Like, what did the number end up at? I feel like this is Rob, I feel like this is a great question, especially at the end of the cycle when we see exactly what the numbers are for each position, right? Like, we know where they want to get to, but I actually want to see, like, tangibly what number do they get to in this class, right? Like, I think that's important to talk about.
Ryan, I have a question that I want to ask you. This is from Brandon with a super chat. Brandon wants to know, because I think I already addressed this earlier. So I'm going to ask you this question. Who are your top 2024 tight end targets that you'd like to see Notre Dame take and that they also have a realistic shot with?
Yeah, the realistic shot takes it a little bit because, I mean, the real answer would be if it was anybody, I would throw Jonathan Eccles in there out of IMG, but I don't see that there'll be a big player in that one. Out of the players that I think they do have a shot at, I would say Jack Larsen would be in there for me. I think as a move tight end, and then I would want to get a little bit of size with him, right? So Martavius Collins is a kid that he hasn't gotten to campus yet. We'll see what happens with that one. Brady Pritzcorn was just on campus here, obviously, this past weekend. Landon Thomas, again, how serious of a one is that? So for now, of the reasonable targets, just because I don't know, I don't think they're going to get in with Eccles. I don't know what's going to happen with Thomas. I'm not sure about Collins either. So for those two, I'm going to go with Jack Larsen and Brady Pritzcorn, who I think is a pretty interesting 1-2 tandem. You kind of talked about this early, Brian. It's like Pritzcorn is a 6'6", 220 plus pound guy who's going to be a massive kid. And then you have kind of the move piece in Jack Larsen. I feel like those guys could play well together. So a realistic combo, I think that they make some sense.
I think that's a great point, Ryan. I didn't really think about that earlier. Like, I'm told who my top two guys were. I mean, I think Notre Dame has a shot with just about any tight end outside of Eccles. So I would go with Landon Thomas and Jack Larsen. Sure. But I think your point is if take away, how you rank them in your top two and all that kind of stuff. I like the idea that I like the thought of the complement of Pritzcorn and Larsen. Because I mean, watching them this weekend, like, they're very different players. I mean, one's 6'6" and long and a vertical guy and a traditional tight end. The other one's an H-back type as well. So it'd be a really nice compliment. But my whole thing is, though, taking away who we like best, of all the tight ends you mentioned, Ryan, there's not a bad answer to who that combination would be. No. And you could throw in a couple kids who don't even have offers yet, and it would still be the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I would love for them to be able to get Eccles from IMG. I mean, that kid could be a defensive end or a tight end at the next level, and he's a really talented player. Yep. If I just threw in some general interest, I would probably throw Landon Thomas in there, replace for Pritzcorn, because I mean, that kid's he's got the goods. So yeah, great question though, Brandon. As always, appreciate the super chat as well. I think
Brandon, you said in there that also that there was a second super chat that we missed. I don't see the other one. I thought we got to both of them. So if we still missed one, just put it again. Don't do a super chat again. Just put what your question was again, if you could.
Well, we want to get through a couple of these super chats. Zach Martin sent us a $2 one there. Nathaniel Plucker is the IB.
Natural Plucker.
Oh, natural. What did I say?
Because we were saying natural. You said natural Plucker.
Yes.
So I dig that.
I love that. Hey, Zach, he's a natural plucker of the football. Has very strong hands.
That's the new IB band name. So that'd be a horrible band because I can't sing. And the only instrument I know how to play anymore is the saxophone. I don't even know how to play that anymore. But I was never very good at piano, and I was pretty good at saxophone in middle school. But that would be a lame band. I don't know.
Well,
can you sing? I don't know if Sean can sing. No, I know Vince can't sing, but Vince would at least give us a bass. We would sound terrible. At least we'd have different octaves. Vince would give us the bass. Him and Sean Stiers would give us the bass. So
that's true. Yeah. I mean, you can ask Caitlin, my wife. I can't sing, but that doesn't stop me from doing it. Right. Okay, so we'll jump over to the Spanky 412. Another super chat. Will God require CJ Carr to go to confession for his grandfather's sins before he lets him lead his offense? Just a funny one.
No, he will not.
Spanky appreciates the super chat, though. I had to get it up there.
I think that a commitment would kind of do that, don't you?
Yes, that would validate it, in my opinion. Yes, I agree. So, thank you for the super chat.
We'll see what happens.
Yep. I'm going to go to D-Troll Hunter here. Brian and Ryan, do you think the offers coming out of the camp are designed more to keep hype for next season's camp than committable offers? No, I don't. I mean, I think that for me, it's about the verifying what you saw on film, right? And just being comfortable with what you saw. And I think that a couple of these offers, again, we talked about Aeneas Williams today. he plays at a little bit of a lower level in Missouri. So you wanted to see if he is a legitimate 5'10", 5'11", 190 plus pounds. Like, you want to be able to just verify those things, because sometimes those things are hard to tell in film. So I just think it's seeing a player in person and checking that box is what kind of sells it.
I'll say this too, Ryan. We don't have a lot of history of Notre Dame staff, this staff, and how they handle camps. This is the first one that this staff has primarily done. I will just say, in the past, when a kid got offered at camp, it was committable. I'll say this. I also think that if you start throwing out a ton of offers to kids that aren't committable from the camp in order to promote the camp the next year, that word spreads and it's gonna hurt you more than it's gonna help you. Look, every school does the whole, yeah, you have an offer, but it's not committable thing. That's just part of life.
Sure.
And it's unfortunate when kids don't understand that and the communication isn't what it needs to be, but that's part of the business, right? But if you start throwing out like fake offers essentially at camps to get kids to come to your camps, then you're going to develop a bad reputation, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I think if anything, the thing that helps you the most is it would be the opposite, right? It's you're going to wait to offer a kid that you really like that is camping at Irish Invasion, and then if you land him, you can then say next year, hey, we signed 8 kids that got offers from Irish Invasion, or 5 kids, or, hey, you signed Garrett Stover and Aeneas Williams and, Mylan Graham and Bronte. I mean, if you signed all those kids who got offered at the camp, then all of a sudden it's like, dude, if you want to be at Notre Dame, go to camp, because if you show out, they'll offer you and you got a shot. And there's a long history of that, of guys earning those offers. I mean, going all the way back to Tyler Eifert. So I think it's the opposite. If they were going to use, if the timing of the offers was going to be used to manipulate future camps, it would more be about holding off on committable offers for camp than it would be throwing out offers that aren't committable. That's kind of would be my 2 cents on that one.
Well, that's why I like how Harry Hiestand does it, right? Like, right. He identifies a small number of players and he lands them. Like, it's not like, I feel like it looks a little, I don't know what the word is. I don't know, like a suspect evaluator. If you're just throwing out a bunch of offers and maybe you can't really, sign in on a guy like that. So yeah. Good question though. D-Troll, appreciate you very much. We're going to go to Brandon listener again, who asks, is the staff recruiting, Bronte Johnson or Tate at defensive back or wide receiver? He is the in-state wide receiver / athlete out of the Fort Wayne area. So Brandon, Brian was there and he took every rep, most reps yesterday as a defensive back. He took very rare reps at wide receiver. Notre Dame is recruiting him currently as a defensive back. I believe it is exclusively as a defensive back. I'm not sure if it has the athlete label on it, but to my knowledge, it is just strictly as a defensive back. So I see them, because I'll be very honest. I like to think I'm a very honest person. I saw some reps of him playing wide receiver, and I didn't love the hands, man. Like, I don't think that he is a natural hands catcher. So that tells me with that length and athleticism profile, more of a defensive back. And there's nothing wrong with that because he's a 6'3" kid that I think is going to continue to grow. So yes, they are recruiting him. It seems more as a defensive back than wide receiver as it currently stands. All right, Brandon with the back-to-back. Do you guys know if Xavier Hamilton is a take right now for the staff? I just feel there's guys higher on the board right now. Yeah, Brandon, just real quick, we'll hit on this one. Xavier, to our knowledge, is not a take for the staff right now. That could change in the future, but as of right now, it does not appear that he is not a take. Yes.
He is not.
Right. So we're going to go now to BC, Irish, 12-13. Do you guys think anyone commits in June?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Pretty darn. Multiples. Yes. Just multiples. It'll be more than 2.
It'll be more than 2. Yes, I agree there. So yes, great question. It would have been more interesting if you would have answered this one
Yes.
yesterday, but there is
Well,
definite. Yeah.
It'd been more interesting if we would have answered it before when he asked it, because when he asked it was right when the show started, before obviously some news broke. So yes, we do see that.
We have a lot of musicians in the chat as well, Brian. Someone said they were a sax player since
there you go.
7. Nice.
Okay, there you go. I dig that. I mean, we could have y'all play instruments and we'll just be the faces of the band, right? Or we can Milli Vanilli this thing and get some real talent out there,
I don't know about that.
We just lip sync, because I can fake sing, and you know what I mean? Like, I can do that, but no.
Milli Vanilli. Haven't heard that in a long time. We're going to go to Bill Fartzer, who is, that's
you and Vince, man. You guys are like little kids, man.
I was just going to say,
Vince had the same reaction.
I wasn't going to laugh. Bill, appreciate you coming back. Who do you think? Sorry, let's read and let's be able to speak here. Who do you think stood out as the best overall player at Irish Invasion? Brian, we kind of hit on this earlier, but you were impressed obviously by Caleb Beasley.
Yeah, he was my top guy. And there was a question that I just starred to, Ryan, if you want to bring that up, and we'll respond to that afterwards. I'll have you respond to that, and I'll answer the question about the performance. He was outstanding. I mean, to me, he was the best player in all aspects of it. Right now, again, there were some guys that just didn't get a ton of opportunities, a ton of reps. Like the receivers didn't get as many reps as there was more more receivers than DBs, I thought, because there's receivers, tight ends, and backs, and there's just, this corners and safety group wasn't real big numbers wise. But so the DBs got a lot more work. We didn't get a chance to see CJ Carr throwing a lot during the one-on-one period. Cam Williams didn't take nearly as many reps as Caleb Beasley. But even if those things happened, I'd have a hard time not having Caleb as my number one guy, because he just stood out. He stood out in the testing. He stood out in the agility drills. He stood out in the one-on-ones. He stood out from a character standpoint. He stood out from a engagement, showing leadership. I mean, just all the things that as a coach you look for. Caleb checked. I mean, the boxes like double checks. I mean, it's permanent marker. Them checks on the thing, right? Like, he was just outstanding. He was just outstanding. So, that would be my. I mean, there really isn't for me a number two that was close to him. Doesn't mean other guys didn't have real good camps. It just meant that he was, to me, just by far the best guy at the camp, in my opinion. Now, the second question from Ben is there any confidence level in getting Caleb Beasley around? I'll allow you to address that one.
Yeah, Ben, I think right now they're absolutely in the conversation. Like Brian kind of illustrated earlier, it seemed like the parents were very much enjoying their time. It seemed they're high. Obviously, he's a high academic kid from a high academic household. Really talented player. So, yeah, I think that Notre Dame is in a good spot early. Got him to campus, got to see everything. Had a great time, obviously, there at camp. We've spoken to him a little bit recently this morning. So, yeah, I think they're in a good spot with him early.
I mean, he's got Bama looking at him. He's got Georgia. I mean, everybody's recruiting Caleb Beasley. That's going to be a national one, but Notre Dame has put itself in a really good, strong early position. But there's like, to me, I feel really confident. We said it early. We feel really good about where they stand with CJ Carr. We felt really good about where they are with Jack Larsen. Really good there with Cam Williams. I love where they are with Caleb Beasley, but that's going to be a different animal, right? Like, it's going to be a little different deal getting Caleb Beasley. Right. But another reason why I really want Caleb Beasley, great kid, great family from what I can tell. Great fit at Notre Dame, great player, but more importantly, I'll say it again, I want Notre Dame back in Tennessee more.
Yes.
And you got Prince Khalil. He can play well and shine. I want to see that one become a factor as well. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to get a Caleb Beasley to go along with it, that would be huge.
Agree. I wanted to pull this one up from Tommy off the subject here. I can play hot cross guns. I think it's hot cross buns on the recorder. Oh, he did correct himself after that. Yeah. I could too, Tommy.
I have no idea what that means.
You don't know? You don't know that? No? Okay. Well, In school,
Oh,
we had to learn how
what
to
was it
play.
again, Ryan? Oh, what was it again?
I don't want to do it again.
Okay, just
Just
wasn't sure.
what
Maybe I'll figure it out the second time you do it.
hum when you say hot cross buns, but hum it, and that's
Okay,
what it sounds like. Okay.
gotcha.
Yes, but when I was a kid, we had to play the recorder in music appreciation, and that was the song that everybody played. So there you go,
Okay.
Tommy. Similar childhood, I think, sir.
Never heard of that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Another CJ Carr question. Why not? The world famous Audi Nitro. Where would
Mhm.
you rate CJ if he was in the 2023 class? Just so unfair, man. They're just
Right.
a year difference, right? Like it's just very unfair.
Other guys have a year of physical development on him. I'd still probably put him in the top 50, but it
Mhm.
would definitely be at the bottom of the top 50 because it's such a loaded quarterback class. But you know, it's hard to do that. I mean, he's 50 to 60 probably because again, he's a younger and year development and all that kind of stuff. So I would not do that. I would not push to reclassify him. I would not do any of those things. I would let him develop at the
Yes.
right time and the right pace. I'm not a huge fan of kids reclassifying. I think I've said this before. If I haven't, I'll say it now. I'm not a big fan of kids reclassifying. I don't mind graduating early. I'm not a big fan of the kids reclassifying. More like not morally, but like just big picture wise, I keep letting your body grow.
Mhm.
Keep letting your mind grow. Enjoy your senior year as much as you can, and do prom, do all that stuff. Go to the beach with your friends and live your life. Right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I would just say that for me, there are certain exceptions to the rule. I think, especially for non-football sports, like I had no problem when Olivia Miles reclassified, to play basketball because the physical gap between a junior in college as a basketball player and a junior in a junior in high school as a basketball player isn't as great, in my opinion, as it is in football. Where there's a risk of injury. There was no risk of injury to Olivia Miles because she skipped her senior year basically to go to Notre Dame. I didn't think that there was.
Right.
For Notre Dame, for a football player, there is more of one when you're younger. And so just let them develop and take that growth. And yeah, you could get more out of, coaching a college coaching staff, but I still want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. There's just a lot of layers to it, right? Like
Mhm.
yeah. I'm not a big fan of reclassification either in football because, like you said, it's such a game that's dependent so much on physical development. Like
Mhm.
I feel it's weird just kind of rushing that process along. So,
Right.
gonna move on to Irish Mojo 25 Posse, talking about Adrian Posse, the quarterback out of Columbus in Miami, Florida, looks bigger than advertised, and the ball jumped out of his hand. Very impressive. Me and Brian were actually talking about this one
Mhm.
earlier as well. He's up there with the Dylan Raiola kid out of Arizona, in my opinion, as far as just pure arm strength.
Mhm.
Adrian Posse, he's got a hose, man. He's got
Yeah.
a howitzer for an arm. There's no doubt about it.
He just has some Brendan Clark to him, though. That's my
Yeah.
issue.
Yep.
It's like, man, what a great throw from a velocity. And it's like, oh, it didn't land anywhere close to where he had receivers. He's just a very raw kid in that regard.
But it still looked good even when it's a misfire.
Yeah.
So,
Great arm, just still learning. Again, sophomore,
right.
still learning the quarterback position. No doubt.
All right. So now we want to move to
So yeah,
Sean.
you work through those, Ryan, and I'll go through and find some more to start
Sounds good.
until we're ready to get up out of here.
Yep. We have Sean Kane asking, how is Massachusetts looking for the 2024-2025 recruits, or was that a one-year wonder for 23? Sean, I don't know if I would say one-year wonder. I'll say 2023 was definitely a strange year with the volume because you talk about, guys like Okunlola and Preston Zinter and Ronan Hannafin, and there's a lot. Boubacar Traore, there's a lot of talent out of the state of Massachusetts in 2023. It seemed like a bit of an anomaly. 2024, you do have Gerby Lamberts, who is an offensive lineman that has been offered by the staff. I think there's still only 4 offensive linemen that have been offered by
that we know of.
Yeah. That we know of. Yeah. So 2025, I haven't really looked too much forward to the Massachusetts area, but I'll say Gerby Lambert's another talented one. I would be surprised, though, if the numbers in 2024, 2025 are as high as 2023, because I just think it was a little bit of an anomaly, just slightly. All right. We are going to go to this one. Bobby, yes, Bobby, I'm going to read this again, but again, we're going to talk more about this next week. What do we take both Page and Otton before Jagasaw and Freeling decide if we land the first two? What do we do if the latter two went in? Bobby, again, I'd say great question. Stop back with us next week. We're going to be
Yeah.
talking about what that class will look like.
Because I think a lot of it's going to have to do with how the visit goes. I mean, that's the reason we're ducking the question. Not ducking the question, but that's the reason we want to put it off. I think it's just going to depend on what the vibe you get from Monroe Freeling is. If you feel like, you know what, this isn't going to end anytime soon, then you may feel like, okay, maybe you have a different decision to make than like, you know what, I think we really knocked it out of the park with this kid and we got a great shot. So let's see how it goes. Right. So it's why we're going to wait till next week. We were going to talk about it today, but a lot of it would have been conjecture in our opinion. And we want to be able to we're fine doing that. But I just feel like in this situation with Monroe Freeling coming next week, it'd just be better for all of us to let's see how that goes and then discuss it on Monday. It can be much more of a, we'll be dealing with more reality than behind that conversation than the other.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of fast forward through some of the offensive line questions. We will save those all.
And John, I appreciate this. I saw John Arundel put the super chat out of asking about, CJ Carr and Dante's recruitment. He then saw that it had been discussed earlier. So he said he's going to go back and listen to that later. But I still wanted to at least bring your super chat up to thank you for the super chat very, very much.
Yeah, John, we really do appreciate that one. I know, Brian, we talked a little bit just about Caleb Beasley a second ago, but
Sorry,
Gary Knutson
I didn't
asked,
mean to take that down.
Oh, no, you're fine. How did the DBs look this weekend? So you mentioned Caleb Beasley. We mentioned Bronte Johnson. Was there anybody else that stood out in a good or bad way? Or I don't want to say bad way.
Yeah, there's a couple kids I liked, but not necessarily Notre Dame liked, to be honest with you. There was a 24 corner, and I'm trying to pull up the thing that I wrote this morning because his name escapes me for the second, but he was a really good player, just was small.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was kind of my issue. He was just undersized, and so that would get him in some trouble. He's a really good football player. There was a kid from DC that was there that was solid. Nobody that really stood out to me like, oh, man, like I remember when like Jalen Elliott was here, Devin Studstill was here and in the same group. And you're like, wow, you got to get these kids, right? Like, man, you definitely got to go after them. I mean, I didn't really see that. But there were some good players there. I'm trying to find this kid's name real quick. So just give me a second. Jameer Benjamin was the kid. He was a really good football player, really good technique, really competitive, really quick feet, but he just like 5'10", and he doesn't have great speed yet. And he's a Michigan kid. And then Jacob Oden was there, and he had some good moments. He had some good moments, but he wasn't quite as tall as I had hoped he would be. And he's a good player that I would continue to recruit, but he's just not a guy that I would take right now. I would want to see him go into his junior year, continue to develop as a player. And I mean, the only guy that I would take right now for sure that was there this weekend is Caleb Beasley. Bronte Johnson, again, he's got some other things he's got to work out and all that, but he'd be the next one. But after that, there's nobody that I would definitely take that was there this weekend for me. There was like a kid that we talked about, like Miles from Chicago. Really liked the kid a lot, and I was impressed by him, but he was more he wasn't necessarily a Notre Dame liked him. You know what I mean? At least not yet. Because, again, we're talking about rising juniors.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of what I saw yesterday.
Important to keep noting that we're talking about kids that are not even juniors in high school for the most part.
And some of these kids are going to, like, just make huge jumps over the next 2 years. And you're like, boy, I wish you could have taken that kid 2 years ago. But you can only go off of what you see now and what your projection is.
And some guys that look like studs are already kind of hit their threshold.
Yeah, this is who they're
growth spurts.
Yeah, this is who they're going to be. Hey, and real quick too, I want to tell people sometimes people jump in the chat late. We're now 2 hours and 13 minutes into this show, right? And sometimes people jump in and they didn't hear the first part of the show where maybe we talked about something, right? So if somebody asks a question that's been addressed or multiple times, just let them know, hey, look, just no big deal. It's already been talked about. It's a big beginning. Don't jump down their throat, okay? Because it's not like they're sitting there. It's not like John was listening for 2 hours and decided, I think I'm going to ask this question again because I forgot what the answer was. People jump in late, right? So there's no need to jump down their throat if they're just asking a question, especially if they give a super chat because they're helping support us. So Absolutely. we don't really, again, appreciate the fact that we're trying to clean that up, but just we don't need to respond that way to people. But we certainly, like I said, appreciate the super chat very much.
Absolutely. Here's a different one, a layer of potential CJ Carr. Travis Connor asks, if they land Carr, does it take a little bit of pressure off the 2023 wide receiver recruiting as you'd feel more confident in getting game-ready guys in 2024? I'd say not for me. I mean, I think 2023 is really important. Like, you need a really good 4-man class, in my opinion, maybe a 5 if you can get an athlete like a Ronan Hannafin in the class, right? Like, I think that you need those numbers in the near future because the depth is not great for the wide receiver room. And 2024 is great. I think that they need to sign 2 great numbers back-to-back years because of what the depth is right now. But I don't think that takes the pressure off of getting dudes in the 2023 class. I think it's paramount that you do that.
Yeah. I think for me, the question, what I would say is that the way I would look at this discussion is, does getting a kid like CJ Carr help with 2023 recruiting in an area where, right now Dante Moore is not jumped in the class. And so you don't have that quarterback to sell. Now you can sell to kids, hey, we got CJ and we're still hoping to get Dante. I think it helps there. And then if you get Dante Moore to go with CJ Carr, I mean, at this point in time, Notre Dame's going to have a very easy time. Very easy time recruiting quarterback at that point, or receivers at that point in time. I was asked a question from someone who sent me a Twitter question during the show.
Okay.
And it was, is CJ Carr mobile and athletic enough to be mobile when in trouble? Yes and yes. He's a good athlete. And that's one of the things I talked about at the beginning of the show. He's much more of a runner in high school than Dante Moore is. I mean, I wouldn't call him a dual threat guy. He's more Brady Quinn than he is Tyler Buckner. But he's a mobile quarterback. He's going to run for a couple hundred yards a year. He's going to be a move the chains, like not quite what Ian Book was, because I think Ian kind of ran himself into trouble at times, but he's going to be able to get out of the pocket if he needs to. He's a guy that you can run read zone with. If you need to, 3rd and 4, he can pull that sucker and run. He's an athletic. He's a good athlete. That's why I used the lacrosse comparison, Ryan, because like he's like that lacrosse type, that strong, kind of twitchy lacrosse kind of athlete, lacrosse build. And for people that know anything about lacrosse, and again, I don't know the game, but I know the athletes. Right. And they're usually like taller, stronger. I mean, you got to be pretty strong to play lacrosse. You got to be agile. You have to have really good feet. You have to have some speed, because they got to run, down and back and forth. And that's why I like that comparison for him as a quarterback. I think that's he doesn't have Tyler Buckner's speed. He's not the runner that Tyler Buckner is, but he's a kid that can manipulate the pocket, move the pocket. And if there's a hole, he's going to run and he can go. He's not Jack Cohn as an athlete, right? He's a good athlete. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, not many people are Tyler Buckner athletes.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
So I want to bring up Tyler Bedwell, who says, why did Cade McNamara leave the Notre Dame class way back then? Is there a potential we see another situation like that with CJ Carr, i.e. committed for well over a year, then bounces last minute? The second part of that, I don't like speculating on that, right? Like if CJ Carr is in the class, I'm going to think that he's going to be in the class for the long haul. I'm not going to be negative about that. Brian, maybe you could give us some insight though into the Cade McNamara situation. I remember when he was committed to Notre Dame, but I don't remember what the overlying why, he left the class and went to Michigan.
He was a year ahead of, I think he just committed too soon, number one. And number two, Notre Dame took Tyler Buckner super early. And they loved Tyler Buckner super early. He was a highly ranked kid. And I just think that Cade looked at Michigan as a better fit. I think he always liked Michigan. I feel like the combination of Buckner, and I don't think he was ever sold on his commitment to begin with, to be honest with you. I think are a big reasons why Cade decommitted from Notre Dame. And again, I don't look at it from the standpoint he was afraid of competition. It's just more of, as I said, when you're uncertain of something or things are kind of, you can have that. And I don't think necessarily quarterback recruiting at the time was super, super great. And for a host of reasons. So here's what we can't do. You can't, every time a kid commits, you can't like find the one worst case scenario situation and be like, gee, I hope this doesn't happen again. The reality is that Notre Dame's had a lot of kids commit early. It wasn't just CJ Carr. Phil Jakovic committed super early. Tyler Buckner committed super early. Drew Pine committed super early. None of those kids decommitted. They're still here. Right. CJ, Steve Angeli didn't commit this early, but he committed a whole year before senior year, he didn't decommit. So there's been a lot of cases where kids committed early and stayed. McNamara was the anomaly not something that's been a trend. So we can't look at the one situation that was terrible and be like, gee, I hope this doesn't happen again, because it was a rare, unique circumstance, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was like Massachusetts in 2023, man. Maybe a little bit of an anomaly, right?
Right.
So let's move on to Jason Saxton. Do you think that Reese and others have already talked to more about the potential Carr commit transparency? Is that something they talk about, Brian? I mean, up front?
Yes. Look, whether they bring it up or he brings it up, it's been discussed. It's been discussed. And it's not like they've hidden the fact that they're recruiting CJ Carr, and Dante, as far as I know, has never asked a school to not recruit kids the year after him. I've never heard that. Never heard that before. You'll hear that sometimes, Ryan. You'll as you are in this business longer, you'll hear more 5-star. You'll hear stories of big time kids say, don't recruit such and such next year. And some schools will listen, most don't, because usually it's a sign that like this kid doesn't want to compete, and that's not a kid that we're going to win a championship with. So yes, I would say that conversation has been had, in my opinion.
Got it. So we only have a couple questions left, unless we get something in here soon. If from Toe Jam 1992 was almost a great year. 91 was a little better though. If a kid is pulling in $1 million in NIL, wouldn't that make them ineligible for financial aid / scholarships?
It would make them ineligible for academic scholarships. An athletic scholarship is in no way. So the way it works is there's multiple scholarships that you can earn in college. At a place like Notre Dame, there's obviously athletic scholarships. There's academic scholarships that are based primarily on your academic excellence. There's also some, you're also involved in this community service and this extracurricular thing like that. There's like different types of minority scholarships, scholarships for if you're an African American, if you're an Asian American, if you're a foreign student. There's all types of different scholarships that students have that you have to meet the criteria for. Not all of them are tied to your financial prowess. Now, there are other scholarships that you can be available for that have to do with your financial need, or what a lot of schools will do is they'll say, okay, well, how much can this kid pay based on his FAFSA? Well, this kid can pay this much. So what we'll then do is, his academic scholarship will be this. We'll give him this, to help pay for it, or, because a lot of schools are going to want to get that government money as opposed to giving up the money from their endowments and the scholarships and all that kind of stuff. Or they'll say, hey, look, we have $20,000 to split up between 4 scholarships. We have 4 kids that can pay up to 5, enough to where that 5,000 can then get 4 kids into school because they can't meet the full need. There's those type of things. Those things are in no way, shape, form, or fashion have anything to do with athletic scholarships. You do not get punished or helped or aided by your academics in regards to an athletic scholarship or your financial situation outside of, are you eligible to receive it academically? As long as you're eligible to receive it, there's no like you get more of a athletic scholarship because you're here, or less of an athletic scholarship because you're here academically. As long as you're eligible, you get the whatever the NCAA GPA test score thing is, then you're good to go. So they're different. They're different types.
It looks like we are down to our final question from Brandon Plesner. Cam Williams versus Nick Marsh. Could they both be takes? Would they both be takes? Who do you like more? How do they compare? Brian, I think for me, they're completely different players. Nick Marsh is a 6'3", kind of long, more of a boundary type receiver. We've talked about Cam during the show. Cam's more of that Lorenzo Styles, silky smooth guy that's going to probably play more to the field, but maybe could play into the boundary at times, but not a traditional boundary type wide receiver. Nick is great with the ball in the air, has great length, physicality at the catch point. So they're just different players, Brandon. I'm always personally, and this is a little bit of a bias thing, I'm always going to prefer the guy that can do more. So I kind of just think Cam could do a little bit more from a route running perspective, from a alignment perspective. So I'm always going to prefer that guy a little bit to just the traditional boundary player. But we've seen traditionally the boundary spot has been a very important element in Notre Dame's offense, and they need that type of player. So different styles. I guess Cam I would prefer just slightly, but Nick is a very talented player as well. Would they both be takes? it's a question that we'll have to answer at a later date, right? We're still
Yeah.
kind of working at their wide receiver board's pretty
Yeah.
big to start so far in 2024. So we'll get the information on there. But right now, I think that they're both very talented receivers in 2024.
Yep. There you go. I agree with what you said, by the way.
Oh,
Then just this last one real quick. Terry Tyler, did Charlie Jones enter the portal? He did. That's the receiver from Iowa. He did enter the portal. I do know that I believe that Notre Dame had some interaction with him, but everything that we've heard is he's going to be going to Purdue, not Notre Dame. So that's where we're at. So, Ryan, I think that's it, man. So why don't you go ahead and take us out of here?
All right. Well, appreciate everybody again for joining us today. Before you leave, if you could please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. We hope everybody out there enjoyed the recruiting hour here today on Monday. I am Ryan. This is Brian. From all of us at Irish Breakdown, we thank you again for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.